We now have both of our co-chairs here, so we can get going whenever they're ready.
From Washington, D.C. Good evening, everyone. We're here.
Chuck, we can hear your TV.
Yeah. I'll 1 second. I just want to change something. And then I'll be ready. Okay, are we ready to go?
Whenever you guys are. Yeah.
I'm ready.
I want to welcome everyone to the January meeting of Community Board 8. I'm Chuck Warren, the co-chair of the committee, and Craig Lader, my fellow co-chair, and we're happy to see everybody here. Do you want to, Will, do you want to explain the rules of operation here before we get going?
Of course. Well, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us for one of our virtual committee meetings, you'll notice that you're muted. And you're going to stay muted throughout the duration of the meeting, except for whenever either the co-chairs of the committee, Chuck Warren or Craig Lader, call on you. If you would like to participate, you can go to the raise hand feature, which can be found under the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen. So you'll press the raise hand button under that icon. You're going to look for that, not the wave or the thumbs up. Those will disappear. Only press the raise hand button once. Do not press it repeatedly. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. And be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. It is important to know that the chat is not available to the presenters or the co-chairs. It is only for technical support to help with Zoom software. It will never, those chats will never be seen by any of the co-chairs or the other participants. If you have an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because there's a lot of people in the room and we may not be able to see you. So chat us if you're having any problems. Otherwise, I'll kick it back over to our co-chairs and they can get their meeting started.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it. Okay, so what we're going to do, our first item on the agenda is there's a letter that we received from the New York City DOT about the proposed expansion of commercial parking regulations on Third Avenue between 61st and 95th Street. And this is to try and alleviate the double parking on Third Avenue with a lot of trucks. And there's a map that was provided with it. And I don't know, Will, whether or not, I assume that all the committee and board members who are here have it, but maybe you can put that map up so people can see it.
And we do have DOT here to present on it.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. All right. who do we have who's here from DOT that besides, I know Colleen's here, but I see Katrina Carey. Is that, are you going to present on this, Katrina?
and Matt Garcia also.
Hi, everyone. It's Colleen Chattergoon from City Department of Transportation. Happy New Year to everyone. I have my colleagues, Katrina and Matt Garcia, who's going to, present and discuss the parking regulation changes. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, great. Why don't you take it away, Katrina and Matt?
Hey everybody, my name is Matt Garcia. I'm here with my colleague Katrina Carey. We're from the DOT Parking Division. So we're primarily focused on changes to meter regulations and metered corridors. So we've been looking at Third Ave in terms of commercial access, and in general, the possible expansion of commercial meters in different areas of the city. Traditionally, commercial meters are restricted or have been more concentrated in the Midtown area and south of 59th Street, but they can provide a big benefit to areas of high commercial demand. So we've been looking at areas outside of that CBD area to expand their use. And so there's a smattering of them on the Upper East Side, a smattering of them on the Upper West Side. But as part of this analysis, we looked at the Upper East Side broadly and then Third Avenue specifically, to understand how we can address the growing commercial needs and the dwindling curb space to really try to mitigate some of the problems we're seeing with commercial double parking, commercial illegal parking, et cetera. So I guess with that, so Katrina put together a presentation that runs through her proposal for Third Ave. So we figured hopefully it will be short so we can go through it and then address any questions, but just kind of generally talk through what we're proposing. So with that, I'll hand it over to Katrina.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, I'm Katrina. Along with Matt, we looked at Third Avenue. Am I able to share my screen for the presentation?
Yes, you can.
Great. Okay, and can you all see that? Great, awesome. So I'll just get into it with a little bit of background. Matt went through a lot of this already, but we are looking to expand some commercial regulations on Third Avenue. So Third Avenue has a lot of congestion, a lot of high demand commercial needs with little commercial regulations associated with that need. So with that, we are aiming to mitigate some of those problems with adding more commercial regulations on those block spaces that really need it, that see those high demand needs. And to go into the project boundaries, so we looked at Third Avenue from 61st to 95th Street. As you can see, this is a very long stretch of corridor. So just to preface the following slides, when I go through the existing conditions and the proposed changes, they will be broken up into chunks so you can better see what exactly is going on here. So first, we're going to go through some of the existing commercial conditions along the corridor. So starting on the northern end of the study corridor, I'll go through the legend first. So we have 3 different types of commercial regulations that allow for commercial access at the curb. The first is unpaid truck loading zones. Second being commercial meters. And then a third one where there is partial day passenger meters and then commercial meters. So usually that's passenger meters following commercial meters. And as you can see on this stretch of the corridor, there's really not much truck access. There's some unpaid truck access on the mains here and a lot on the side streets, but still not enough on the main Third Avenue itself. And we took some pictures of some of the conditions as well. As you can see here, this is East 89th to East 90th Street, where you see some double parking and trucks making their deliveries. And then moving further down south, a lot of the same conditions, so that unpaid truck access, some on the side streets and very sparse on the mains. And again, you see a lot of double parking in this stretch as well. And I should also mention that these dots here represent the signage. And yeah, just as an FYI here. And moving further down south, so that last stretch of the study corridor, there's again some unpaid truck loading on the side streets, and you're seeing some more paid commercial regulations here on the side streets, but still no access largely on the mains. Now I'll go into some of the proposed changes. And on this slide, I'll go through a little bit about our process and the types of interventions that we have to address the demand of commercial vehicles. So the three main categories and interventions that we can make is some curbside allocation. So this is just giving that space to commercial vehicles, so giving that dedicated space to them. We can also mess around with days and hours that fit the demand of the commercial vehicles. And with this, we want to match those curbside regulations to the days and times of the commercial activity. We can also use time limits as a way to address the demand and encourage the turnover. And with all of this, we're hoping through these measures to, decrease double parking, encourage short-term stays, and provide more users and provide space to more users over the course of the day for these commercial vehicles on a very high demand corridor. So with our proposal, this is kind of the approach that we took. We did a commercial activity and a land use data analysis. We looked at commercial land use density, which really is just the amount of commercial on a given block face. So businesses that tend to see a lot of commercial deliveries throughout the day, that need that space for the vehicles to make the deliveries. We also looked at commercial vehicle parking violation density, which is a mouthful, but really all we mean there is the amount of violations on a given block face, commercial violations on a given block face. So higher the violation tends to say that there are issues on that block face. We also looked at a lack of commercial vehicle access on those sides, on the side streets. So if there's less available curb space on the side streets, then there's also no available curb space on Third Avenue, then there's a probability that we need to allow some space for them. We also collected some field data. We went out into the field and collected things like double parking and illegal parking and the volume of commercial vehicles. And with all of that, we determined the level of commercial intervention that was needed. And the interventions that we can do here are partial block truck loading zones. So this one's kind of the less aggressive mitigation regulation. So this, on our study corridor, these are block faces that have commercial demand relative to the area, but maybe less than the rest of the block faces that we looked at. They still need some curb space, but maybe not as aggressive. And then the highest and most aggressive intervention we have is just straight commercial metered regulations. So these are the block faces. The block faces that have this treatment are those that have the highest commercial demand relative to the area. And then we also have this third category of regulation that is passenger meter regulations following the commercial regulations. So this one is where, passenger meters follow commercial. So these are block faces where access for commercial vehicles is needed, but we're also seeing some demand for passenger vehicles that's notable during the PM and also on weekends. So with those three categories in mind, I'm going to first go through what's being proposed for truck loading zones. So this is the full study corridor that's, again, chopped up in three segments just for spatial issues. So these are the block faces that we determined needed some sort of intervention, but again, not as aggressive as adding a commercial meter or adding a commercial meter with passenger meters following. And then this we'll have the full proposal at the end of this as well. And so the next one is commercial meter regulations, so the most aggressive intervention. These are the block faces that have very high demand, see a lot of trucks throughout the day, and really need that space for commercial. Our standard for commercial vehicles is 3 hours. So that's what you typically see for commercial vehicles regulations throughout the city for metered. But then we added some 1 hour metered parking for commercial vehicles for those really, really high demand block faces that have high truck volume, sees a lot of double parking, a lot of violations, and really needs that turnover to serve more users throughout the day.
Katrina, am I reading these maps right here? The one on the left, it would be at between 95th and 94th, and then 88th and 87th, and 86th and 85th. On the left side, are those the only ones that would have it?
For the 1 hour meter commercial, or?
Yeah, the commercial meters.
Yes, you're going to. Oh, go ahead.
I'm trying to look at this, just the one on the left here, starting at 95th Street and going down 85th Street. Is that, am I reading it right? I see some lines here and I'm just, you can't tell. Maybe they're different color lines, but you can't really tell on this. At least I can't easily.
Right, yes. So there is kind of an orange and, a darker orange. The lighter orange is going to be a 3 hour commercial meter.
And the only one is from 86th to 88th to 87th Street in that first block here, from the first 10 blocks.
Yes, there's a 1 hour meter parking from 95th to 94th.
Right.
And then 86th to 85th on that first block.
Right. And there's the 3 hour on the 88th to 87th. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And we can change around the colors to pass around if it's difficult to read.
A little, at least for me anyway.
Yeah. That's fixable, definitely. So now we'll go into the commercial metered regulations when demand is high. So these, again, are those commercial meters with passenger metered parking following. And those are split up into two different subcategories. So there's a category where the commercial meter becomes passenger on Saturdays. So these are block faces that we determine had a lot of commercial demand throughout the week, and some passenger demand on the weekends. And then the second category are those block faces that become passenger in the PM and on Saturdays. So these are block faces where we're seeing high demand for commercial vehicles in the AM through the midday, and then seeing demand for passenger vehicles in the evening and during the weekend as well. And just to put that all together, this is what it would look like. And as you can see, it's a little sporadic, but our approach to this was to be very specific to the context of the block face itself. We saw that each block face had its own unique set of issues and needs. And so we wanted to be very context specific with this.
So except for, so I'm clear, just it's all going to be commercial parking, and the ones that are marked either 3 hours or 1 hour, except for those areas where you said after a certain point it would revert to residential after, you know, the PM hours on the weekends, right?
Correct. That would, yeah, and just to be clear, they would revert back to passenger metered parking. So it would still be metered, but for, you know, all vehicle parking. So your standard 2 hour metered parking.
For the PM and weekend times in those areas.
Correct. Yeah.
And what time in the morning would these regulations start?
I think that depends on either if it has like a rush hour regulation or something that prevents it starting at a standard time, but largely it's starting at 7 or 8 in the morning.
And it will still allow for street cleaning?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. That's another factor too. Street cleaning is during those times, then we'll adjust accordingly the start time.
Yeah, because on Third Ave, they do have the street cleaning at certain, you know, hours.
Yeah.
It's earlier hours and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Is that your, before we get to questions, is that your, do you have anything further you want to mention?
I will pull up the full proposal after this if you all want to look at it, but I have one more slide.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So this is just going through next steps for the project. So we do want to collect data on our interventions. So after implementation, we want to collect things like double parking and illegal parking durations, occupancy, to see the impact of our regulation changes, see if they work, see what doesn't work, and adjust accordingly. And that's it. Questions?
Okay. Why don't we, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Do we have any comments from the public first? That's how we usually do it. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak?
I'll remind Chuck, I'll remind everybody that if you'd like to participate, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, look for the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen, press that, and look for the raise hand button that you'll find there.
Do you see, I don't see any public hands up. Do you, Will? I don't know.
No, I do not.
Okay. And all right, so in the absence of any public comment, why don't we go to the board? And I see Michelle Birnbaum with her hand up. Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. So I'm looking at this and a couple of general questions. Number one, I noticed that the letters were all addressed in November with an expectation of a response by December 30th. So somehow we're a little late about this, but I'm assuming that the DOT is holding any action until they hear from us. That'll be my assumption. Katrina's nodding, so thank you.
Yeah,
The other thing, the other thing is did you talk to the businesses along the corridor where you're proposing the regulations? We assume that they might be happy with it because it eases their deliveries. But what kind of actual input did you get from them? Because the other side of that coin is it inhibits passenger occupancy. So that would be my first question, if you can tell me how that was approached. My second question is about posting. This is such an important topic and it covers such a significant part of our district. And there are specific locations mentioned. Having said that, I am surprised that we don't have more community members on this Zoom. Those who are actually impacted by this. So I question about whether or not the actual locations were posted and that it wasn't just posted as talking about loading and unloading zones. So those are my two questions, your discussions with business and your outreach in terms of posting to the public.
Right. So I think this represents the first step of that outreach. So I think that looking it through the process that we went through, this is kind of, you can kind of think of it as the data side, right? So kind of understanding what data sets that we can put together to produce a proposal. I think DOT's standard approach for business outreach is through merchant surveys. I think the commercial versus passenger thing that you mentioned is very true, right? Sometimes business owners would appreciate the passenger vehicle parking for their customers, and others would appreciate, better access to deliveries that they're getting. And I think that that's a really big balance that we're trying to strike here. The locations where, so Katrina mentioned the locations where we have commercial during the morning, where we're seeing like very intense demand, switching back to passenger. We were trying to focus those areas on the locations where we have small retail and locations where that passenger demand is still there. I think that broadly at DOT, we have to prioritize users that have no choice but to use the curb. So commercial vehicles and transit vehicles. So what you'll see a lot is trucks parking in the bus stop, or trucks double parking or parking illegally. And I think that that's something that we're trying to mitigate here. And we have to deprioritize customer parking when in the face of, this level of congestion and the fact that it can pose real safety problems on the corridor. But yeah, does that answer your question? Sorry, I'm kind of just going on.
Well, yeah, partially when you're talking about the balance between customer parking and truck loading. I may have misread it, but I thought that most of the truck loading was for most of the day with passengers on weekend and after 7 o'clock. So that to me is not really sharing the day. For restaurants, for example, that might want passengers being able to park in front of their restaurants, that's sort of a late start. And it's actually late for certain deliveries, which could probably, now we have a lot of zones from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., maybe from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., which may be working well in certain areas. So to go all the way from 7 to 7, to me is a little bit of a jump, especially if you're saying that you have not necessarily had the direct input from each of the businesses in front of which these zones are proposed, which I think you should. And also based on what you said, since you're saying this is the very preliminary and this is the start of it all, I'm thinking that perhaps this committee should hear it, digest it, and probably not leap to a resolution, since I would like to see more input from residents and people in the community. which goes to my point about posting, because I don't see a big number of those on this call. A good percentage is a community board. So taking those two things into consideration, I would ask, number one, that we treat it as the preliminary inquiry that you are proposing that it is, and that we too get the input from the commercial people, from the stores and, restaurants, as you get that, so that that information helps us to support a decision, propose something, or not support, so that we're not just reactive, but that we can participate in a proactive way.
Well, let me actually ask Matt two questions. One, what is the time frame for implementation? And two, are you even looking for a resolution on this, or is this more informational?
Well, that's a good question. I think the time frame is flexible. So we are hoping to get a sense from you all of how this would land in your community, and questions and changes, etc. So I think that because it does represent meter changes and signage changes, the actual hard work of it is less tied, for instance, to a season, right? So we don't necessarily have to wait till spring to put in markings for these things, right? So it's kind of flexible in that regard. So we've gone through this process over the past 6 to 8 months, digging through the data and trying to understand the needs of the corridors from that kind of outside perspective. And we're hoping for the implementation to start sometime in the first half of 2022.
Okay. Well, why don't we get some further questions, and then we'll see what we want to do with this. We have a couple of other board members who wanted to speak. I know Paul Crickler wants to say something, and Rit Agarwal too. Both. So why don't we unmute Paul?
Thank you. Can you hear me, Chuck?
Feeling, yeah. Yes, yeah.
Everybody. I want to thank DOT for the great presentation. It was very clear, very thorough, very easy to understand. And I think this is a great idea. Put simply, excuse me, I think we need to be, as a community board, looking out for the interests of our community, which is 80% not car owners. And we should think about things like safety, other use of public space like wider sidewalks, trees, benches, bike lanes. There's loading zones. There's a multitude of ways we can improve the use of our public space. So for me, it checks two very big boxes. It's an improvement in safety, and secondly, it'll decrease congestion. For over a decade, I lived in the 90s on Second Avenue, and I've been on my bike and walked up that stretch in the 90s hundreds of times, and there are double or triple parked vans there and trucks. It's very, very dangerous. So I fully support this, and I want to say thank you again to DOT.
Thanks, Paul. Rit, can we unmute Rit?
Did I make it? Okay,
Yes.
thanks, Chuck.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'd like
I
to.
hope you're okay.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I like thousands of New Yorkers. I wound up with Omicron from New Year's, so I'll be all right though. Thanks. I'd like to echo Paul's thanks to DOT. I thought that was a really good presentation. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into it. My question though is whether you think this goes far enough. I mean, I think it doesn't take research, not that you shouldn't have done it. It doesn't take research to know that we've got a massive problem with commercial loading all the way up and down Third Avenue. And, as I look at some of the block faces, including my own, that you've designated as passenger for the afternoons, and yet, ironically, that block face is the one in front of Chick-fil-A that we talked about as a committee only a month or so ago. Like, the demand there is not for 3-hour passenger parking. Demand there is for 10-minute pickup and drop off. And I wonder to what extent this goes far enough, which doesn't lead me to think that we shouldn't do it, but to realize that probably we have to go far enough. And, with all due respect, Michelle, I can't imagine there are any restaurants on Third Avenue that really get a meaningful number of their patrons driving and parking in front of their neighborhood. This is a neighborhood whose businesses rely on people who walk and bike and take subways. So I don't think there's a need to do too much surveying of retailers to figure this out. This is a problem that we understand with our just taking a walk.
Yeah, so
Thank you, Rit.
to your point about, are we going far enough, right? So I think that that's kind of what we want to look at. I mean, so right now, as you saw through Katrina's existing conditions, there's just almost nothing on Third Avenue itself. So we're hoping that this is getting that space out there, trying, managing it based on the level of demand that we're seeing, right? And then seeing what happens. So kind of that next step of, let's not just put this in and leave, right? Let's put this in and understand, did double parking go down? Did durations go down? Did more unique users get served at that block phase? So like, these are specific metrics that we can test against to hopefully show that this regulation change caused this benefit. But I agree. I think we see this as kind of like a first step. We don't want to come in here and then just leave, right? We want to come in here, try some stuff out, get, some real data to understand what is working, what's not. And, maybe some of these proposals end up not working, right? Maybe we have to ratchet it up. Maybe we should be looking at rate changes or more aggressive time limits or, different incentives that we can easily do through curb regulations to hopefully get to a more functioning corridor, a safer corridor. But yeah.
Matt, I think that was one of my thoughts, was that this was a good way to start out, because to see whether it does work. And,
Right.
Taken selected blocks, and I think you can, just for what you said, whether things will work or you have to come up with other things. So I think it does make sense. I do see someone from the public here, and then I'll take Billy and Rita. Evelyn David, I think, has her hand up. And can we unmute Evelyn?
Go ahead, Evelyn.
Go ahead, you're unmuted.
Okay, hi, good evening. I'm going to ask a question. Am I allowed to speak on the other issues that are coming up tonight if I speak on this? Because I wanted to say one very brief thing to the DOT.
Well, when you say speak on the other one, I'd like you to do it though when that issue comes up.
Yes, obviously, yes, that's okay. So I just want to say, I do live in this neighborhood. I'm on Third Avenue and Lex all the time walking around. There are a lot of cars. That is passenger cars parked all day long. So if you're going, like, I know you're targeting a very specific area. I also know when in our specific in the 60s, the trucks that are do deliveries, I often ask, when is your delivery coming in? Because if I'm waiting for something in a store, I'll ask them when your deliveries come in. So I actually talk to the people that run the stores and find out. So to Michelle's point, it might really be a good idea to find out when their deliveries come in, and so that you're not taking away the parking for parkers. I know you think only 80%, 20% of people only have cars in New York City. That's, I debate that strongly. So, because those parking spots are taken all day long by drivers. Okay. But I understand the problem with the double parking. This is actually a really good idea. You're not going as severe as Paris, that won't allow trucks after 7 a.m. I mean, that's how they got rid of their double parking problem. Part of it. They've got other issues, obviously. But so it really is a very good idea. But if they're only delivering like between 10 and 11 in the morning, then that spot is taken until 7 o'clock at night. You might find, that signage could be until, 12 o'clock or something like that, to free it up for people that do come in and park and go shopping. So I'm just saying, I know you're trying to create a balance, and this is a test drive for that area. So hopefully you'll come back to the board and discuss further after you get your analysis and your data back from your first efforts. I don't know. That's what I kind of want to say. Do a test drive and talk to the people, the store owners, because they do have very specific times when their deliveries come in.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Thank you. Billy Freeland? Can we unmute Billy?
I want to thank Yeah, I want to thank DOT. It was a great presentation. Thank you, Katrina and Matt. And you've totally identified a huge issue in our neighborhood, and I'm glad we're taking steps towards solving it. I want to echo Rit because I agree. I kind of, my takeaway from the presentation was, does this go far enough, like what Rit said? And I do have a few questions, if I could maybe tick through them. One question is, how do you decide that you're going to employ the 3-hour parking versus 1 hour parking? Is that a matter of, what businesses there are in that given block, and they say, look, our deliveries take more than 1 hour? How does that work? I'm not a logistics person.
Yeah, so it can vary depending on location, as I'm sure you imagine. I think from our perspective, there's two kind of ways to think of time limits. One is allowing whatever needs to be done, so letting that thing have enough time, right, to get done. And then the other way to think about time limits is a pressure to get people to move over. So when we talk a lot about turnover and getting people to move, at DOT, we can't create more curb space, right? All we can really do is create more curb space across the day, like in time, right? And we do that by creating more slots, by getting people to turn over. And with commercial vehicles, it's interesting because traditionally it's been 3-hour time limits. And this is kind of from a perspective of, if you imagine the universe of commercial vehicles, of commercial users, some of them are kind of the clear cartoon ones. It's a truck delivering, it takes 15 to half hour, and then they leave. Others that are still technically commercial vehicles in our traffic laws, like HVAC people, plumbers, et cetera, those are still valid commercial vehicles, but they could be servicing an entire high-rise all day. So there's this demand of like long-term stays versus short-term stays. And we're still kind of working out, we don't have a lot of tools in our toolbox to kind of play with that. And so for this corridor, I think we've really focused on really prioritizing 1 hour for those locations where we need the turnover. We're seeing so many trucks, right? Like high commercial demand, that we need those people to leave as soon as possible, and leave the places for 3 hour for those locations that are a little less. So you can kind of think of it as like a ladder. It's like, unpaid truck is lower demand than a 3-hour meter, than a 1 hour meter. So it's like, as commercial demand gets more and more high, we can kind of ratchet up that management to hopefully get people to turn over.
Mm-hmm. And then another question is, I wasn't clear why you were considering the option of truck loading only zones. And I looked at your presentation, a few of them are in the low 60s, which I think also happened to be the area, one of the few areas in our neighborhood on Third Ave where you had nearby commercial metered parking already. So why not start with the more aggressive approach of metered parking, where you've decided to go with a truck loading only zone?
I think, Katrina, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, I think just broadly for DOT, it's easier to scale up than scale down, specifically when meters are at play. And this corridor specifically has an existing meter plant on the corridor, on the block faces themselves, passenger meters. So we can kind of play with those. And there may be cases where we proposed a truck loading zone where we definitely want to ramp it up in the future, but testing starting small and seeing if those zones work out for that specific block face. And once we get our data, we're able to ramp that up. Mm-hmm. Did you have anything to add, Matt?
No, yeah, I think that's correct. And I think sometimes there's locations where it's like the passenger demand could be the problem, right? We could see double parking passenger vehicles, we want to carve out space, just like, I guess Katrina's saying, where it's like, the first step is just creating that space, right? And seeing what happens. And then it's like ratcheting up from there.
Yeah. I guess I'll combine my final two questions into one to give you a crack at them. One is, I just love to know how this works with the enforcement piece, because you can put in the best plans, but if there's no real enforcement, so I guess the way I'd ask the question is, have you had experiences in other neighborhoods where you've implemented these types of designs and it's been met with the type of enforcement to actually see it succeed? And if not, what can we as a community board do to work with the 19th precinct to make sure that this is matched with enforcement? So that's part one. And part two is just, looking at your toolkit. One thing that I know is not included is dynamic parking pricing. And I'm wondering if that is something that DOT may at all be able to consider in schemes like this one, where the price, adjusts depending on, particular days where demand is especially high, or if we see that, okay, this meter parking isn't quite working because the price isn't where it needs to be. So if you have responses to either of those, I'd welcome them.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think going to addressing kind of the demand or the dynamic pricing element. So you can argue that New York City currently has a form of dynamic pricing because we have tiered rates the longer you stay. So the longer you stay, the higher you pay. So for commercial vehicles, the first hour is cheaper than the second hour, right? And again, this is another part of our toolbox where we're trying to get people to turn over, only use as much time as they need, and then move along. In the same way, the passenger metered parking is also tiered like that. We've had previous efforts in New York to do other types of dynamics. So it might be more expensive after 4 p.m. for like a dinner rush, which, might fall in a neighborhood that doesn't have any demand throughout the day, but maybe a lot of nightlife, right? So those demand pricing ideas and kind of tweaks are definitely on the table. I think with our current meter programming, some of them can be a little tricky. So we have to be careful in terms of how those are actually implemented. But I think that is kind of on the table, especially in Manhattan, where demands are so high compared to a lot of other places in the city, where pricing sometimes is the only thing that people will really listen to in a way to affect their behavior. And I think that you're right. We can make a lot of regulations and apply them, but they're only as good as the enforcement that we have at the curb to make things happen or make people follow the rules. Luckily, I think meter receipt enforcement is one of the things that we can rely to a certain degree on for NYPD to enforce, because it is a simple process, to see the meter receipt and understand the violation, whether or not it's expired or not. So I think that is something, hopefully, that will help us out in situations like this where their meter changes, But I agree. I think that the more support and, for proper and dedicated enforcement of these new rules with NYPD, the better. So I think DOT would really appreciate that support from you all in those conversations, et cetera. But yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both for dealing with all my questions. I appreciate it. And it was a great presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Billy. Rita Popper, can we unmute Rita?
Thank you for your presentation. It really was excellent. I just have a question. Did you take into consideration the restaurants that are now have extended their capacity by going into the roadbed? Has that been thought about in what you are proposing?
Yes. So I think open restaurants, as DOT's program is called, it's definitely been as you all can imagine, a very complicating factor here. Not least of all because they can still pop up and go away, and the space count on any given block face can be dramatically changed depending on how many open restaurants are using curbside space at any given time. And there's no guarantee that those open restaurants will stay, right? So from the DOT perspective, it's been a bit of a struggle. We're definitely cognizant of the impacts of open restaurants and how they play into this. I don't know if Colleen, I don't know if DOT has an official line on how we address open restaurants at this point. You might be able to provide.
Hi. So with the open restaurants, we will work with the owners in terms of what type of structure or seating they have out there. Right now the program is permanent, and we are going to be reevaluating all of the structures that are currently out there citywide and work with the owners to make sure that they are in compliance.
So we're almost like in a weird phase right now where it's like these structures are probably going to be evaluated as part of the more permanent program. So some of them might, stay valid and some of them might not. But I guess to answer your question, in long story short, we did try to look at how open restaurants affected the available curb space on that block to factor into that analysis.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita. Okay, looks like Michelle Birnbaum wanted to have another crack here.
Yes, thank you very much, Chuck. I just want us all to be very careful about when we talk about the needs of percentages of the population. There are many populations that are in the city that are less than 20%. In many different categories, and yet they deserve our consideration and they deserve planning for them. In terms of the cars, if you recall, when we instituted all the bike lanes and the whole bike network, bikers were 2.5% of the population. Had we not addressed that issue, they would probably still be that. They've increased because it was a case of build it and they will come. But it wasn't that they were tossed aside because they weren't significant numbers. In terms of restaurants or businesses being concerned that people cannot pull up, the restaurants in 86th Street expressed that very strongly. It did affect their business. A bodega in the 60s lost 40% of his business because it was dependent on taxi drivers that came in. You may recall that because the issue came before our committee. They would come in for their breaks or for coffee or for whatever. And when the bike lanes were put in and they couldn't get near the curb, they in fact couldn't go to that spot. And that man lost his business, lost 40% of the business. And I believe he is out of business. So there are all kinds of different circumstances in this city. We don't favor one group over another. They don't have to meet a threshold of being 20% of a population. Everybody is deserving of consideration, and I suggest that we all take it under consideration and be as thoughtful as we can about everybody who lives in this city and not just toss them off because we think that they are not deserving of certain courtesies that other people are. So I would suggest that. I appreciate this conversation. I am really happy to have it. I don't think there's any question that we need loading zones. However, I would like to see more participation from the people who own the businesses and live in the buildings. I don't think that's a bad thing to do. So to the extent that DOT does plan additional outreach, I'm very pleased about that. And I suggest that we look forward, to their additional, commentary and what they have found. So thank you.
Thank you. I see we have a member of the public that wants to comment on this. Andrea Lynch, I believe. Can we unmute Andrea Lynch?
Yes, I'm a member of the public, and the lady that spoke before me and gave me a perfect segue. I do live above a restaurant, and they extended over to the street, and there's very little place to park. And sometimes, I come in a cab, maybe from a trip visiting my daughter in New Jersey. I have a lot of bags. It's practically impossible to park, get off my bags real quick before, because the street got so narrow between the restaurants and the parking. And if a cab stops there for a couple of minutes, it is a bus honking right behind. So it's really, as far as quality of living or trying to live in the city, is kind of a little difficult. I just want to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't know. I don't have a sense. I guess the sense of the committee here at this point is no one's prepared to necessarily take any action on this right now. I think at some point we'd like to chime in on this, but maybe this is not the point. So
Red has his hands up.
Okay.
We may see some action, I'm guessing.
Okay. So yeah. Red,
yeah, I guess Chuck, I'm wondering what we would wait for. I mean, I acknowledge Michelle's point that that you could do more interaction with the merchants, but I struggle to believe that movement in this direction is not the right thing, and that therefore moving quickly is better than moving slowly to address a need that we all perceive as being a critical one. Like what do we gain? We've heard from DOT already that their intention is to try this out and to monitor it aggressively. So
look, it's up to the committee. Anyone can propose a motion, obviously.
I think we lost Chuck. Rick, will you? Now I hear you, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Listen, it's obviously up to the committee to take action. Anyone can propose, certainly make a motion, but that's what I just wanted to get the sense of the committee here on this. And I see Billy has his hand up, and then Paul wants to say.
Well, I would like to propose a resolution supporting the proposal that DOT just presented to us, and I could, I guess, very briefly speak to it if you'd like.
Sure. Is there a second, or is that Lori?
Lori nodded for second.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I think, to me, this is pretty straightforward. I haven't heard, anything to dissuade me from the particulars of what DOT proposed. I'm also persuaded by this idea that we can always ratchet up and ratchet down if things, perhaps aren't quite working as we'd hoped. I think a resolution should take into account the comments we've heard tonight from members of the board to encourage DOT to take certain things into consideration. Rit's point about, considering things like what's happening on 86th to 87th Street, where the Chick-fil-A is, perhaps, keeping in mind some, questions we have around, enforcement, or urging, DOT to, work with and communicate with the 19th precinct to ensure that there's a strong enforcement component here. And I'm open to friendly amendments if folks feel there are particular points that ought to be considered in a resolution. But I think overall, this is a really strong proposal that we should move more quickly than not, and that it will never be too late to hear feedback from the community, either immediately or, once this is put into place, to make adjustments.
Okay, thank you, Billy. Paul Crickler wanted to speak on this, then Rebecca.
Yes, thank you. I think we should move very quickly. It's a matter of safety. I can't imagine why we would put people's lives at risk. As recently as Christmas Eve, 2 of our fellow citizens were killed by the driver of a truck on 62nd and 3rd. I don't know if that's in our boundaries or if that's CP6. It doesn't really matter for the point of it.
Boundaries.
It doesn't really matter. But anyway, 2 people were killed because we don't have safe infrastructure for people who walk, cross the street or the avenue, or ride bikes. I can't imagine why we would wait. Thank you. I fully support what Billy's proposing.
Thank you. Rebecca Dangor, can we unmute Rebecca?
Call to question.
Is there a second to that?
Paul and Barbara and Rita.
Question's been called. So if
Let me just do a quick roll call. If anyone doesn't hear their name, please let me know. We have myself, Chuck, Lori, Michelle, Mrs. Brown, Paul, Rebecca Dangor, Rit, Billy, Alita, Barbara, and Rita.
Is that everybody then now? I assume so. So why don't we say that if you're in favor, you don't have to do anything, but anyone who wants to vote no, abstaining, or not voting for cause should raise their hand. Okay, Michelle.
Assuming, I just want to clarify the resolution. It's for all 37 locations, hours, and everything as proposed?
No, it's not 37 locations. It's
Or
37.
34, whatever it was? Is that what this resolution is?
From 61st to 95th Street as presented.
95th.
As presented.
And,
Okay.
and would any, and I was going to just suggest maybe we want to ask DOT to come back a year after implementation to review how it's going and to consider whether we need to modify it.
Yeah. Okay. So Michelle, do you want to
No.
vote?
I'll vote no.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So everyone else in the affirmative and Michelle, no. Thank you. Thank you very much for a good presentation on that. The next item is also a DOT item, and this has to do with the neighborhood loading zones in 37 locations. That's the 37 locations that I think Michelle was alluding to. And these are areas set aside for the delivery trucks that have been such an issue in our community. That, be they Amazon, Fresh Direct, UPS, FedEx, you name it. And there's specific locations here that are specified in the letter. And is there going to be someone from DOT that's going to discuss this? Colleen?
And Will, hi, Colleen, 1 second. Will, can you just put up the map that I had put together so everyone can have that visible? Sorry, just thought this would make everyone's life easier.
Good idea.
Sure, 1 second.
Didn't mean to interrupt, Colleen.
Hey, that's okay. Let me know when I can speak.
Feel free to go ahead.
Okay, great. Apologies, I couldn't get anyone from that particular division to come to the meeting tonight. But the neighborhood loading zones that we have instituted citywide, that goal is or the program, it aims to reduce double parking on narrow residential streets by providing space at the curb for activities such as package deliveries by commercial vehicles, taxi and car service pickup and drop off, and active loading and unloading of personal vehicles. So this is an initiative that we have took on, and we found it to be very successful, again, in creating a safer environment, more efficient environment for all users of the roadway, where, again, it has helped to reduce double parking. So we sent a letter to the community board with a few locations that we would like to install neighborhood loading zones. And if you can let us know your thoughts on that as well.
Good. Thank you, Colleen. Are there any, I don't know whether, I assume the committee's had a chance to look at the letters, and I don't know if the public has seen any of this, though, particularly. But just to quickly go through it, there's 70th, it's East 70th Street between Lexington and Park, and then between First and Lexington. This is all on 70th Street, and then First and Second Avenue. And 71st Street, these are 40 feet zones in front of a particular building. That's
anywhere from 25 to 40 feet they range.
Yeah,
Correct.
25.
And that's
Right.
correct. And keep in mind, this is, the issue that a lot of community boards are faced with, where, a particular residential builder will come and say, we're asking for no parking regulation in front of our building so that we can have that curbside access for, pick up and drop off and, getting it out for a vehicle with our groceries and so forth.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of streets, that was East 70th and 71st Street. I'll just quickly, it's York Avenue on 73rd Street, and then it's 77th Street, 78th Street. I'm not gonna go through every 85th Street and 90th Street. And let me just read them just so everybody has a sense of where they are here. And then 91st Street and 94th Street, 95th Street, and then Lexington Avenue between 94th and 95th, and Park Avenue between 94th and 95th, and also York Avenue, 89th and 90th, and York Avenue between 88th and 89th Street, and again, York Avenue between 90th and 91st Street, and finally, York Avenue between 72nd and 73rd Street. Those are very, just to give everybody, yeah, there's a list of them. So, you know, I don't know if anybody has any members of the public would like to comment on this idea. And I think, as Colleen says, it goes to a couple of things. It's because it's not just the trucks, the delivery trucks, but it's also you know, limos and others, and other. It's a place in front of one area, 25 to 40 feet, that allows people to pick up and drop off.
Yeah, and we've installed these in phases. For example, in Chelsea, you have quite a few of them in the Upper West Side, and we'll monitor it, and we'll be more than happy to come back in a year to give you an update on it.
Okay, let's see if there's, I see one person, I see Joe Sullivan, a member of the public, that would like to talk on this. And
yes, thank you very much. Joe Sullivan, member of the public, 363 East 76th Street. So the corner of 76th Street in First Avenue, where we actually had a fatality a few weeks back, where a delivery driver was struck, and in a spot where we notoriously have a Fresh Direct truck that just sort of sits there in perpetuity. They take one in, and then a new Fresh Direct comes in, and it's basically been there for the 5 years that I've been living in the building. Is the amount of space that's being allocated for these drop-offs large enough to accommodate Fresh Direct and Peapod and those trucks that just sort of seem to live there?
No, the space would only accommodate a FedEx truck or a UPS truck, and again, a taxi, car, or Uber, and your own personal vehicle. It's not intended for tractor trailers to be there.
Right. Well, if I could just mention that, as a member, there's no spots allocated for First Avenue. You know, it's great that you're considering this drop-off provision. We have a problem, I think, that I'm sure is on other people's minds with the trucks that are just sitting there.
Yeah, and if you have locations that you want us to look at, feel free to submit a list to Will, and Will can send that to me, and we can add that on our list for consideration. We'll evaluate it.
That'd be great. I think you're solving for a problem, but not necessarily the larger food delivery, the big trucks that I think is a big problem on the avenues.
We'd be happy to work with you to find locations.
Thank you, Colleen.
You're welcome.
So if you want to submit a location to Will at the board office, he'll get it to Colleen, and then it'll get into the system. Okay, the next, Bill Roskin, I believe, next member of the public who wants to comment on this. Can we unmute Bill Roskin?
Hi, yeah, I'm just, you can hear me, yes? This is the first time that I've seen anything relating to this issue. I think it's a good idea to deal with the issue, but I don't know how anybody intelligently can, from the public, can give you a comment when we haven't seen it. And you just put it up a minute ago, but that wasn't sufficient for anybody to understand what actually is happening. So if there's any way that that map can be put on in such a way it can be copied and discussed by different boards, the co-op boards and condo boards, it might be helpful. But
it's on our website. You watched me show you where on our website it was as I was pulling it up and pulling up the letter, but I've put it in the chat for everybody multiple times.
Can we print it from there?
Yes, you can download anything on our website.
And just so you know, on our DOT's website, we have a feedback, location where you can submit, sites that you would like us to consider. I'm going to share that link with Will, or I can put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I see Andrea Lynch from also a member of the public wants to speak on this. Can we unmute Andrea?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just want to maybe make a little proposal that to make the narrow streets, especially when they have restaurants, things outside, those big things, structures, maybe they can be, depending on the block, I'm not saying the whole street, but blocks being load and unload only, for how many minutes, that might help. Thank you.
Colleen, can you, how is that going to, in terms of, that's places to, that's the loading area. How, is there any time limit on that?
Yeah, there is a time limit on it. And I think if I'm not mistaken, it might be 30 minutes.
I think it's 15.
15, yeah, 15 to 30 minutes.
Is it 15, do you think, Craig?
I'm pretty sure when I've seen it on the Upper West Side that the signs posted were 15-minute.
Yeah, it's probably 15. Matt, do you know if it's 15 minutes? I think it might be.
Yeah, I know that I think in our rules, it's defined as expeditious.
Yeah.
Which has like a associate, I think I thought it was less than 30, but I know that they've been tweaking that. So it may have been a 15 to 30 situation.
Yeah. I think just to be on the safe side, I want to say it's less than 30 minutes. But the whole point of the neighborhood loading zone is for expeditious pickup, drop off, and deliveries.
Yeah. I guess as Joe was saying, I think it's helpful. I guess as Joe was saying, it still doesn't deal with the trucks that, they're not tractor trailers, but even if it's a fresh direct truck, let's say, that stays there for a long time.
Again, the program is not intended for trucks.
Right.
It's
No, I understand. It may be used for that, however, as we know.
Well, it's not, the length is not big enough for a truck.
Well, is that right? Okay. Any further, Will, do you see any further members of the public? I don't here, but maybe you do.
No, I do not.
Okay. So why don't we take board members? Rita Popper. We have Rita. There you go.
I think that this is something that we need. All of us, not all of us, I can't speak for everyone. Many of us have asked to get those packages delivered to us from Amazon, FedEx, et cetera, But to that gentleman's problem about First Direct, the big trailer trucks, we have discussed that, and we're here to try to make the city work a little bit better. There is a new distribution company is that you can have your groceries in 15 minutes. They are working out of empty spaces, places with there's nobody there. They've been vacated. And what we really need to do is Fresh Direct is standing in one place and disseminating the packages from there. Therefore, it could be in one store and have the packages delivered. So I think that this is an attempt to help us with our new way of life. And that's really what has happened more predominantly during the pandemic than ever before. So I think this is a good thing.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah,
go ahead. Can
I just mention quickly, I just looked back at our minutes from December 2019 when we had a presentation from New York City DOT on this, and the Deputy Borough Commissioner actually gave the presentation, and she mentioned in the presentation that it is intended for expeditious loading and unloading, and it's understood to be less than 30 minutes in duration.
Yes. And the parking and the regulation would be depending, it would be no parking Monday through Friday, whether it's 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., depending in the area.
It would be no parking. That would be the regulation.
Yes, it would be, it would say no parking. You know, whatever the days might be, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And again, it's for expeditious drop off, pickup, loading and unloading.
Right, and you have a special sign with a graphic that makes it clear that it's a neighborhood loading zone as opposed to just a traditional no parking.
No parking, that's correct.
Will that discourage people who park in no parking areas because they have some kind of a permit?
Placard.
Yeah, placard. So, yeah.
Correct.
What do you think? Did you hear, Colleen?
Yeah.
You think that'll discourage people with placards from parking there?
Yes, because of the fact that you have that's the signage with the icon on it. It clearly specifies it's a neighborhood loading zone.
Okay. Barbara Rudder, can we unmute Barbara?
You skipped Rit, but go ahead, Barbara.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
okay
I'm
now,
sorry.
right?
I started to call Rit. I got distracted. Let Rit first. I'm sorry, Barbara.
Okay.
Rit had his hand up first. Go ahead, Rit.
Oh,
Sorry.
Thanks. I would have been happy to defer to Barbara, but appreciate it. First of all, I'll say thank you, Colleen, and to your colleagues at DOT. I agree with Rita that this is something that we need, and very glad that it's finally coming to this neighborhood. I've been watching the rollout elsewhere. I guess my question is similar to what I asked before, which is, does this go far enough? Because it would seem to me that you've identified a number of locations. It's not clear to me that those are necessarily locations that have so many more FedEx deliveries or so many more Ubers or taxis. And I'd love to understand just why you chose those places and not others, and what the prospects are for expanding. Because just given that everybody gets deliveries, everybody takes taxis, you know, it would strike me that to manage the city well, you'd actually need, 2 or 3 of these on every block.
Yeah, and these are really good questions. I mean, the plan is to implement these in phases. It's not to say that we will not in the future look at other quarters in the CB. For example, we expanded in 2 areas in Chelsea during, in phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So I'm sure that we are going to be expanding this program in your community board. And again, as I mentioned, there is a link below where you can provide feedback and submit locations to us, and we will compile that and evaluate it as well. And again, we will come back to the community and we will share our findings with you.
Thank you, Colleen. Barbara Rudder. So this time.
You hear me now, right? Thank
Ready.
you. And I agree with what others said, that this sounds great, but I do have 2 questions. First of all, if I understand correctly, I live on 87th Street and 2nd Avenue. It sounds like there's no zone anywhere in the area. So when FedEx comes to my building, which it does quite often, would they just still park the way they do right now, or will they park 10 blocks away, or how will that work?
I mean, if there's no zone in your area, we'll be more than happy to evaluate your location.
You seem to not go in the 80s too much. Am I right about it? It seems to be
correct, but it's not to say that we will not expand the program. We will, and we're implementing it in phases.
Okay, great. So right now it would be the same old, same old. My second question is, as good as this is, the one area that we actually talked about before the pandemic and then it went on hold was Amazon specifically, that will, a truck comes up, they unload on the street, a whole street's taken out, a load of people are there and start working. This does not affect that at all. Am I right? This is
correct.
So it's the same old way of doing it until we hear from you next. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Rebecca Dangor, I believe, is next. Unmute Rebecca.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting this. I think it's a great start. The only thing I'll say is I think that maybe actually the graphic might be a little, I don't know, I have a little bit of a fear that some residents in certain buildings that are affected by this will think they can't load and unload their cars. So I think if we pass any type of resolution, or if we, in our minutes, we make it clear that this actually helps them to do that, because that's kind of the only complaint I could think people would have, which is wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think people should focus on the letter as much as possible, but the letter itself doesn't specify precisely where it is, which is why I want to at least put a map up, or just put this into a map to provide approximate locations. Now, when I was working on this and reaching out with and communicating with DOT, for example, I was asking about the proposed zone on York between 89th and 90th. And in fact, it was explained to me that it's going to be adjacent to the existing fire hydrant, which is right off of 90th Street. So where I put it, as I said, is an approximate location. But I think what I want to just make clear to everyone is that it's the maps are really just for presentation purposes only and aren't to be taken literally. It was meant to just allow people to see it in context. For example, the fact that, and I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but all of the corridors that are proposed right now for having these neighborhood loading zones on the cross streets align with our crosstown bike lanes. 70th, 71st, 77th, 78th, 85th Street, 90th, and 91st. So I too think there seem to be some gaps and would hope that those could be filled in going forward. I also want to just acknowledge that I have a concern regarding the fact that some of these locations are on blocks where you have buildings that actually have driveways. And I understand that it is a different purpose, but I'd like to see these allocated to locations where there aren't alternatives and people who live in buildings nearby don't have an option for being able to go into be dropped off or picked up in an existing building driveway. But besides that, I think that I've been pushing this as an issue for a while now, and I'm glad to see that we're going to have these zones, and that hopefully this is the beginning of a longer discussion as to how we can better organize our streets to allow for this loading and unloading activity to take place, and think about also the issues when it comes to commercial loading and unloading as well, which is why, and Colleen, I'm sure you're tired of me saying this, I'm hoping that we can get a presentation in the coming months from the Office of Freight and Mobility, who I know is doing work on dealing with some of the issues that some of the speakers prior to me have brought forward, which is specifically the issue of trucks that are parking and doing warehousing type of activities, which was one of the primary causes of the fatality that took place at 76th and First.
And I'll work on that to get someone to come and give a presentation on it.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, now, is anyone, what's the sense of the committee? Do we want to take any action on this at this point? Knowing that, I mean, we know there's going to be opportunities to add more sites, maybe even subtract sites if we look specifically at them, which we're not doing in any detail today. But do we want to?
Rebecca has her hand back up.
Who?
I would move that we support the locations listed with, I guess, as part of the resolution that, we look forward to seeing if there are any more necessary spaces in our neighborhood.
Or modifying the list as based on other issues and stuff like like Craig's list of, streets that have a lot of driveways in it? Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a second to that, I assume? Second? Yes, I see Rit seconding.
Billy, yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion here? Is Rit, did you want to say
Rita
anything?
and Rit.
Rita, okay. What, Rita, would you like to say something?
Rita, just unmute.
Yeah, Rita, unmute.
I have a new mouse and we haven't made friends yet. It's a right left and I've never had one. I think it's just too early to vote on it. It's sketchy. If we vote on it, it means that we approve every one of those streets, and I don't think we've studied it enough. It's just my opinion. But the concept is good.
I mean,
I don't know.
frankly, we don't need a resolution on it, just so you know, if you choose to go that path.
We can look at it more closely and see if we want to recommend some more sites. Maybe that's what we could do as opposed to passing a resolution now. But
I would actually suggest, I would suggest that I don't know if there's any reason to wait on getting a start to this, and we can again revisit this after a set amount of time, and at that point ask for more or less if we feel it's working or not working.
Okay. Further discussion. Rit, do you want to say anything? Can we?
Yeah, I would just I agree with Craig. I think we should have a bias towards action on some of these things that are obviously common sense. And while I agree also that, as I said, I'd like to see more. There may be one or two places where these are not ideally located, but I think that's the kind of thing that we see with time. And I would rather spend 6 months trying out what I expect to be the vast majority of these places that are good, and then retract the, handful that might be bad, rather than waiting, enduring the conditions that we have without amelioration for, a number of months while we figure out which couple aren't ideal. So again, I support the motion. I think we should have a bias towards action on things that are common sense. So I think we should move. Thank you.
Well, that's a pretty shocking concept, common sense, but we'll see. Rebecca, Rebecca, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the resolution can specify that we're supporting these as the starting point, and we'll reevaluate if some maybe don't make sense or some are not there that are needed.
Okay. Are we ready to vote then? We have the resolution.
Yes, and I see the same 12 people still on the call, and I'll repeat them again. Myself, Chuck, Lori, Michelle, Mrs. Brown, Paul, Rebecca, Denger, Rick, Billy, Alita, Barbara, Rita.
Okay, so
you missed Peter Borak. He joined, so it's now 13.
Oh, thank you for
Peter.
catching that. That's why I like to call the names out.
So if people don't, so we're going to vote. If people want to vote no, not abstain, or not voting for cause, please raise their hand. Okay. I see Michelle.
Abstain.
Michelle abstaining. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Everyone else in the Rita Popper. Abstain. Okay. So we have 2 abstentions. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Now our next item is the continuing discussion of a request for no parking signage of about 2 car lengths in front of 205 East 92nd Street to Easton, and the general discussion of the criteria that we should consider for future requests for no parking or no standing signage in front of building entrances. That's sort of we just talked about having these loading zones and stuff, and that fits a little bit into this discussion. So are there Are there members of the public that want to talk about this subject? Yes, Evelyn David would like to be heard on this. So can we unmute Evelyn?
Yes, hi again. So we're talking about this in terms of no parking and unloading zones, right, for these other places. Why don't you just do one space in front of this building that's a very expensive building and was built with somebody with no foresight, or just figured, we'll get the space afterwards, it doesn't matter. I don't know. I was walking past Manhattan House, and that's got this beautiful, nice driveway you can drive into. I mean, that's a whole different story there, the way that the street is configured in front of, I guess it's 66th Street. But having said that, they built this great, big, expensive building, and they didn't leave any spaces. Just give them a space in front of the building, not two spaces. What you're talking, you used a word, start to give these spaces. I mean, you kind of mentioned that right 2 minutes ago or a second ago. And I'm thinking, just do this for this building by building, because I do park. We're panicked about congestion pricing. I know you know that. I don't care what percentage of the population we are, we still have needs. And the reason we all have cars is for very, very, very specific reasons. And you're just pushing us out. It's just one thing after the other is making me very sad and very sort of upset. So the best thing to do is to keep voicing opinions, try to be logical about it. And if they need one space, put an unloading thing in front of their building. Most of the buildings on Park Avenue, all over the place, the doormen come out and say, please don't park there. We do everything we can to leave a space. And the cars that park always leave a space. Now, it's not enough for a car to pull in, but it's enough for a person to walk through easily, right? So it's not like everybody's being mean to all these great big buildings. But if these people really, really, really need a space to unload, to have a car pull in on, then I guess they should get it. But not two spaces. I don't know why they need two spaces. That's kind of like, when I started reading this closely, I thought, what is with the two spaces thing? Anyway, that's my, I'm hoping, I hope it'll be case by case. That's what I'm hoping, because things are going to get crazier and worse and worse and worse with congestion pricing. So there you go. Thank you.
I'd just like to mention for the record that doormen can say that, but it's not legal to say that you can't park there. They'd like you not to park there, because you can park there unless there's signage that says you can't. Let's see who's next. We have a couple of other members of the public here. Leah Hanlon has her hand up, and can we unmute Leah Hanlon?
Hi, I apologize if this connection is terrible, but I don't understand why you would give a building even one space because they're rich. I don't understand why walk-ups would not be entitled to one space. And you can't put one space in front of every building unless you're going to go in an entirely different direction. So I disagree respectfully with what Evelyn just said. I don't think being rich entitles you to one space at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Joe Sullivan. Joe, why don't we unmute Joe?
Thank you, Chuck. I just think that, I knew nothing or very little until Colleen's presentation about the neighborhood loading zone. And it seems like a great solution for the question that's in front of you now, which is why not give, instead of, try to target a neighborhood loading zone spot near this building that's made that request, rather than give them that one building its own spots, two spots or a spot and a half. Why not try to solve for it with what we've seen presented to us as a fantastic sort of forward-thinking program that truly benefits the entire block and the neighborhood. I assure you that if one building gets it, the next building's going to want it. And then you're gonna have all these buildings asking for it. And you have the solution, I think, right in front of you in the NLZ. Anyway, thank you very much, Chuck.
Yeah. So Joe, let me try to actually provide a little background here. So this hopefully can be good context for everyone. The distinction, I think, as we're having this discussion is that neighborhood loading zones, at least the ones proposed for this neighborhood, are from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Buildings, large or any residential building has pickup drop-off activity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's one distinction that I think needs to be thought about when we're looking at this holistically. The second piece, of course, is the fact that these zones that the zones are considered similar to no parking. And we had this discussion earlier, and when we had our last full board meeting, with no parking zones, there are certain types of vehicles that do have the ability to park there legally, which then would essentially negate the impact of having a no parking zone in front of the building if someone with a accessible vehicle placard were to decide that they want to park there. They're perfectly entitled to do that in a no parking zone. So the question becomes, are we talking what's appropriate, a no parking signage or some other type of signage like no standing or something more stringent that would be more restrictive to allow that space to be cleared for people to be picked up and dropped off. So I just want to set that context for everyone as we are having this discussion, because all these factors play into each other.
I appreciate that, Craig. Thank you.
Let me mention other context here and why this is coming back here. We had this building come before us last month, and we basically adhered to our policy. We have had a general policy in the committee and the board for a long time that we don't grant these kinds of requests because of some of the things that Joe mentioned and others mentioned, that we think that it would result in a lot of requests from a lot of buildings, et cetera. But at our full board there, we had an extensive discussion that, well, it seemed that maybe we should make an exception for this building, and maybe we should look at our policy again and see if there are standards that we ought to come up with. And so that, at my suggestion, this was referred back to the committee, and that's why we're considering it again. So I think that's sort of the context of the discussion that we're having now, and I appreciate everybody's comments, and we'll get more comments as to and I think we ought to at some point talk about whether or not there are certain broad guidelines that we ought to use to look at these things. So why don't I don't see any public members with their hands up, so why don't I go to the board? Unless you see anything, Will? I don't see any.
That was the last one.
Yeah. So why don't we go to Paul Crickler first, and then Barbara Rutter second.
Thank you. I think we should look at broader criteria. I think we should do it with some urgency. I think we should not wait to approve this one while we are doing that. I think it's our responsibility to do a thorough but a quick job and not hasty. If we take too long, people can rightly say to us that we're holding them up. I'd like to frame this in a slightly different way, because otherwise I think you'll get bored of me talking about 80% and things like that the whole time. I used to own a car. I used to own a Honda Odyssey. When the kids were younger, we had a Honda Odyssey, and we parked it in a parking garage. And it was exorbitantly expensive. It was cripplingly expensive. And I thought often about parking on the street. And I remember every time I would have these thoughts about doing it, all I had to do was see on 93rd Street where I lived, the snake of cars when it was street cleaning time, how people were just waiting in their cars for an hour, hour and a half. And then the snake, I actually saw the magic snake once, and they all went back in again, which I thought was a New York thing. Then I thought, okay, if I had a car, can I deal with that? Then sometimes there's a big construction site or a parking or a dump in the street. It blocks off 3 spaces. So the spaces are clearly, it's if I had to park, if I had a car now and I had to park on the street, I'd find it insane. It would drive me nuts. But this is the way I want to frame our discussion, people. Even if we lived in Staten Island, where 80% of people own cars, or any place where 80% own cars, it's a matter of balancing the insanity or the pain or the annoyance of having to find a car parking space with the feeling you get when you get the phone call that your son has been killed in an accident. Safety issues are more important. This may seem like a small issue in comparison. You think, I've ridden down that street hundreds of times. If there are cars parked all the way down and there's someone stopping outside and a truck, it's phenomenally dangerous. It just is. Now, people may disagree on that particular street. I'd just like us to frame our discussion on these things in a much better way. I use the word better, that's my own judgment. Car parking spaces are not more important than people's lives. It's as simple as that. I think we've got to break out of the habit of having everything seem equally important. A bike lane, a car parking space, it's a life. Again, I'll remind you, there were 2 people killed by a driver only 2 weeks ago. 30 blocks from where we're talking about. So again, even if we were talking about a place where 80% of cars, over people own a car, I would still make the same point. The fact that we're 20% just kind of makes the point even more clearly to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Barbara Rutter, can we unmute Barbara?
Thank you. I've given a lot of thought to this. I am a believer in having broad general ideas, and we do have some. We don't name streets after people. I'm sorry, Chuck, but we'll never have the Chuck Warren way because we don't do that. Street life has, you have to have a light on it, certain things. In this case, it's hard for me to imagine that we can have a general rule. And if we do, I hope we have exceptions, and this is one of them. I know that street, but I didn't know it. I purposely went to look after Mrs. Brown's so eloquent speech last time at our community board. I went to look at it. That is such a dangerous street. I wouldn't want a zoning law because I wouldn't want one of these hand trucks to come out and lose a grip and go downtown. We need something that helps people to get out, whether they have a carriage or they're carrying something or they have a walker or a wheelchair. This is just an area that I think it's a very, very important to have this. If there is a general rule, a general policy, and by the way, I never knew you did have a general policy. I was speaking to a friend of mine that lives on 61st Street in Lexington Avenue. Her building got on 61st on the corner of Lex. They have a no parking in front of their home, and so on. Whether it's no parking or some other designation to hold it up, because some people with placards may go there, it doesn't seem like the right thing, and maybe there should be another designation that you would know about more than I do. So that's my feeling. I feel very strongly that this is an extreme safety issue. It is very few streets have that much of an incline as that street does. Whether you're going down, I always think of it going down, but that's because I usually go from 2nd to 1st Avenue. I mean, going up because I go from 2nd to 3rd Avenue, but it's going down if you go the other way.
Thank you. Mrs. Brown, I believe, is next. Can we unmute Mrs. Brown?
Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. And Barbara, thank you for your comments. Much appreciated. My concern, number one, it's a safety issue. I am on a walker. I am 89 years old. I cannot board transportation to go to the hospital or to get in a vehicle because the cars are parked in front of the building. They do not leave enough space for me to board transportation. And it's illegal for me to board from the traffic side, but I cannot board from the sidewalk side. And it is a decline. It is going to FDR north and south. So you have many vehicles that speed down that segment of the street. It's a safety issue. And if there is a policy then I would like for us to look at it and not use a broad brush, because each situation dictates a different response. And it's about the quality of life for the elderly disabled, who I feel is the heartbeat of this community. All you need to do is look at our board, and that will give you a sense of who we are and what we do and how we represent the community. So I'm asking the committee to reconsider. We deserve your support. And I ask that you make the recommendation and/or decision to support this. If you could just support one car length, it doesn't have to be two, and some type of designation where the disabled or anyone can board transportation. It is very much needed. It is a safety issue. And thank you very much.
Can I actually ask you a question, Mrs. Brown?
Certainly.
Do you notice that there are residents of your building or in buildings in general that are taking accessorized vehicles that would not be able to fit within one standard parking space size?
Yes.
That I just wanted to bring that up because as we have this discussion, one space versus two, there is a need for larger vehicles to be able to perform pickup and drop off of passengers that may not fit into a traditional parking space. So I was wondering if that's something that you've seen there.
Yes, I have seen that. Yes, I have. Especially if Accessoride uses the large vans as opposed to a broker service. So that has been a problem. Oftentimes the Accessoride van, if there's space, will park across the street at the Yorkville Towers turnout. And but oftentimes they don't have any space there, so they have to double park in the street, and it affects the flow of traffic. And the cars are constantly honking, and people are trying to navigate getting into the vehicle, and it's a safety issue because you should not board any type of vehicle from the traffic side of the street. It's a problem.
Yeah, I think if we do take an action, I think it should be two spaces. You can't, I think, because of all the kinds of vehicles, that if we're looking to do something for people who have problems getting around, then they'll have a lot of those accessorized vehicles and things like that. So I think
I would agree with you, Chuck. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. Brown.
Thank you.
Rit wants to say something on this, and can we unmute Rit?
Thanks, Chuck. And I think all of you know that I believe both that we should do this for this particular building and that we need to completely revamp a policy that I think is misguided. Building on what Paul said, I find the argument that, well, if we do this for one building, every building will want it, to be a little bit ironic, because what that suggests is that this is a really important issue to everybody in the neighborhood to be able to get in and out of their buildings. We saw in the presentation at the congestion pricing task force at the end of last year that there are twice as many trips taken by taxi and for-hire vehicle every day as by private vehicle. And we know that every private vehicle doesn't park on the side of the road, but it does load and unload at the curb. And what that means is that there is, as we've seen, tremendous pressure for loading and unloading. What happens in the absence of this as a standard thing that we do for buildings of a certain size is that it pushes all of that loading and unloading activity into the travel lane, which is both dangerous for people like Mrs. Brown who have a mobility impairment. It's dangerous for everybody, actually, and it impedes the flow of traffic. So this is counterproductive to anything that I think is consistent with a high quality of life for the people who live in this neighborhood. We've heard some allegations earlier that this was because the people in this building are rich. I think that's a ridiculous allegation. I think the idea really ought to be that a critical mass of people, if the needs are such, because the traffic, the number of people who walk in and out of a given door every day, leads to a high volume of loading and unloading, I'd argue that is a place where we need a loading and unloading only zone. And if it's a densely populated brownstone, if it's a NYCHA building that happens to be on the sidewalk, none of that, the type of building should not matter. It's the density of traffic in and out of a given doorway that should be a key criterion for us to use. And then finally, on the point of 1 or 2 spaces, the other thing I'd consider, which definitely leads me to think about 2 spaces, is we often see the phenomenon that whether it's Uber drivers or taxis or the FedEx truck or any kind of pickup and drop off, they're not going to take the time to back in and do a parallel parking maneuver because it takes too much time and effort. So if there's only 1 space, they're still going to stand in the travel lane and impede traffic and create a bit of that safety hazard. By giving two car lengths, you actually create the inviting space from the perspective of the driver, where it's a forward pull-in rather than a parallel parking maneuver. And I think that achieves our objectives much more significantly because it means that loading and unloading space will actually be used at the curbside as opposed to still having a vehicle in the travel lane and simply creating a pedestrian walkway across into the travel lane. So for those reasons, I think we should definitely do this for this building. I think your point about whether no parking or a more stringent type of designation, I think we should support the more stringent type of designation because I agree we should not be endorsing additional spaces that just happen to get used up by people with placards, for example. And I think we as a committee need to come up with an approach that invites buildings that meet similar criteria to go ahead and submit these requests and for us to approve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rid. Rebecca Dangor, can we unmute Rebecca?
Hi, so I agree with what has been said before, and I do think that supporting this particular request would not set a precedent because I do think this street is quite unique. I know at the last meeting, someone had even suggested maybe having a speed bump because the street was so narrow and cars were going so fast. So I don't think that this should alarm people that we would necessarily approve every single request. I mean, if the street is so narrow, so steep, and it's so dangerous that someone thought it needed a speed bump, I don't think that would match every other request we would get. And I also know during the full board meeting, I think one board member who's not here tonight had suggested that maybe we review it again in 6 months or a year to see if it was helping. I think that should still be on the table. But, and if we end up voting to support this, I think we can even specify and clarify that this doesn't necessarily mean we would support every proposal, but this is a very unique street with a unique need. And also, I don't know if Craig and Chuck, you wanted to talk again about the building across the street, which I know has different type of regulation. I'm blanking on what it was, but I think there was a unique reason for it. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yes, Craig knows the situation.
They actually had built a pull-in over there, so it's not in the parking lane. It's a separate parking area.
You know, they have those. They have a carve out there, and they also have a carve out on 90th Street too. It's part of the Rupert Towers, Yorkville Towers complex there. There's one on 90th, and there's Pullen that Craig is talking about, and then Yorkville is on 92nd Street.
I mean, even though it's a different situation, I think it's important to note that people thought it was necessary there to have some type of thing. So I would encourage us to support this, and we can have a broader discussion about what merits an approval in the future. But I don't think we should let this one go necessarily for the sake of precedent.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Let me there's a couple of public members who want to speak first. Let me take Leah Hanlon, who I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, and then Evelyn David, and then we'll get back to the board.
I did speak before. I'm not certain if you can hear me though, because I have such a wretched internet connection. Can you hear me?
Yes. We actually hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. I feel like there's something of a double standard happening here. If you point out that the elderly and the disabled are having a problem negotiating the bike lanes and the bikes on the sidewalk and just the general scofflaw bike operation in our neighborhood, no one has any sympathy for the elderly and disabled in those situations when you want to have bicycling reined in some way. But if it comes to taking away parking spaces or enforcing against drivers to protect the elderly and the disabled, then everyone is all for it. And it just seems inconsistent to me. You can either be pro elderly and disabled and making them safe on the streets, or you can be anti that, but you can't pick and choose. And that's, I just am always so frustrated because there seems to be a lot of double standard happening. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Evelyn David, can we unmute Evelyn?
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. I want to answer something. One of you said that doormen, for the record, are not allowed to stop people from parking in front of their buildings. I do know that. They do have signs up, but just as a parker, I try to give the space, knowing that people that have a walker or need to get in and out of cars, that is what I do, is to leave the spot. Do the best I can when I park. That is just a personal thing that I do, and most people I know do the same thing. So that was just an answer to you. Yes, I know that they're not allowed to. Because I did have a problem once and I called the police. They said they're not allowed to paint a line on the front of their door. Anyway, that's a long time ago. So in back to this one spot to two spots. If a spot is open, this is in my head. If a spot is open and reserved in front of a building, a person who has a walker can certainly get out and get into an Uber that is stopped on the street. Yes, I realize it's a narrow street, but if they're downstairs and they're waiting for the Uber is there and they get in. Okay, so the Uber is not going to pull in anyway, by the way. They won't pull in. So you've got the spot all open for you with your walker, et cetera, and somebody can come and help. If they have the vans that pick up people, I have a question. What side of the van does the door open on? Because school buses have doors on both sides. You know, when they stop in front of a building, the door opens and the driver's on the other side. Do those little vans work that same way? I mean, you'll still be blocking the street, yes. And by the way, the idea of having a speed bump on a narrow street, if it really is a treacherously steep street and people go racing down it, that would definitely help. That would absolutely help. So I don't know. The one space, two space, I keep thinking, you know, if they've got the space, it'll be reserved. At least they'll be able to get in and out of whatever vehicle stops for them. So the question is, these vans that the ride share, or the vans that pick up people that are city, you know, where is the door on those? And 93rd Street goes west, so a van would have to come up.
It's 92nd Street. Okay. I guess Evelyn's on mute.
Chuck, did you call on me?
No, let me call Peter. I
Great.
guess
Thanks,
Evelyn.
Chuck.
Why don't we go to Peter Borak though? Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. I think some good comments all around. Last month, I made the point that if we are going to open this up, I do think we need to do it in a systematic way with some forethought. And I still stand by that. So it seems like the board is generally in favor of this particular application for the particular needs of this building and of this street, which seem to make sense. But I still think that we should think about this holistically. You know, we don't represent the needs of one building or one street, but really the entire community board. And so one of the things I think that might be worthwhile is to, and it's not something I've seen before, but to actually appoint a subcommittee and maybe have a few members sit down, virtually, offline, and think about some of the criteria that we would look at if future applications do come before the board. Because, you know, if this building does warrant it, then I'm sure that there are others in the community that also do as well. There are some very large buildings with populations that could also benefit from this. So that's a motion that I'd like to make if the chairs would deem that appropriate and friendly.
I don't think we need a motion, but well, let me just tell you my thought on this, and Craig can have his thought. I'm not in favor of having people go off and come up with proposals because I think we're better off doing it in a public session. I think what we ought to do is come up. I think the way we can come up with a few thoughts and then kick it around here in the committee, because it's always been in my time on the community board, I've never generally liked to engage in a lot of discussion out of if it's a committee situation, out of the committee's site. And so while Craig and I have to do things, agenda and stuff like that, and we may come up with some ideas, but I think in generally, I don't know how Craig feels, but my thought is not to have some people go off separately and do that.
Well, I
So
was going to
Craig,
say that if we want to try to keep things out in the open, maybe we want to consider an approach where we can actually have, if we're going to allow this going forward on a case-by-case basis, where any applicant would provide us with some basic information and we'd have a list of questions, including things like number of units and if they were able to give us demographics in terms of the age breakdown. I don't even know if they would have it. Proximity to nearest no standing zone, so we have some idea as to whether there are other opportunities for people to be able to do loading and unloading at the curbside on that side of the street. Things of that nature to at least give us the context and other safety concerns, whether there's a steep grade or whether there's a blind spot somewhere, something that would allow us to be able to assess and know why it would be a valid application. Because I guess my personal stance that I mentioned last time is I think there is a need to have on virtually every block some sort of opportunity for people to access the curbside, and we can't be allowing every building to have it, or else we would be completely transforming the street in a way that I don't know that we would be intending to do in this fashion. But we should at least, or maybe in a quicker than we ideal fashion, but it would give us an opportunity to be able to look at things more broadly and be able to get closer to at least what I see as a lofty goal, but a goal that is perhaps achievable, where we would be able to improve access for everyone and to be able to combine it, much like DOT is doing with neighborhood loading zones, perhaps looking at places where it's either in proximity or not in proximity to something, so we could find an ideal location for it.
Okay. So, or people could think of the kinds of things, I mean, like you said, whether it's a street that goes downhill and the street where there's a lot of speeding, where there's a lot of traffic, there's some streets that are feeders, just so happens 92nd Street is a feeder to the FDR, but you can get on 92nd Street and go up north or south on the FDR. So that encourages more traffic there. Just looking at the kind of criteria that we're talking about, and we could come up with those kinds of things, I think, in a discussion and kick them around here and decide what we want to do. But I think just my own feeling is that that's something that we want to consider probably separately from this application at this point, because we've gone pretty far down on this application. And if we might take us a little bit longer to come up with the general criteria. And so I think even though we put them both on the agenda, my suggestion is that we deal with this application tonight, and then we look at some criteria and look at what our policy might be, maybe at our next meeting or something.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think from just a timing standpoint, we probably want to try to move the meeting and the agenda forward, and we've had enough we have enough ideas that we can now just digest that and come back to it and discuss it further at a future meeting.
Right.
Understood. I think that all makes sense. Can I just ask one question, a factual question? For this particular building, and I apologize if this was said last week, I just don't recall, how many units are in this building?
270 or something like that. I could have it wrong, but do you remember? Does anybody remember offhand? But it's over 200. Maybe it's 230 or 250, somewhere in that range.
Understood. Thank you. I think that's informative.
Thanks. Rita Popper is next, I believe. But yes, you did it.
I lived on the street for 46 years. I empathize with Mrs. Brown's problem, but I think there is a solution, and it's already on the street. Right next to the entrance to Mrs. Brown's, to the building that Mrs. Brown lives in, is an outdoor public space. And right beyond that public space, which is about 2 car lengths or 3 car lengths, right after that is a large space where refuse from the condo on that block, where they're able to take their refuse out. It's a huge space. It's not used during the day. It's not used. I don't know. There is a schedule when that garbage is picked up. There's not garbage strewn all over. They're in very large containers. It may be that we could use that space. It already exists. We have 3 garages on that block. We have a curb cut on Rupert Yorkville. We have this 3-car space for this place for the condos, and we have the space. And I did walk around the whole building, and on the other side is the Wynwood School, and there are 2 plastic, A-frames into the street that says for bus parking. There's no DOT sign. It's just that they put out those 2 A-frames, and you can park in front of the Wynwood School. So there is a solution. I think that we need DOT to go up and assess this and help Mrs. Brown as much as we can. It exists. It's there.
Rita, when you say though, when is garbage put out there then? Though, I mean, doesn't the garbage take up the space?
No, it's against it's almost as if it was a curb cut, but it's not a curb cut. The fencing is inward, and these are large metal carts, if you will. And there's only about 2 carts in there, and when they're emptied, they're taken out. And there is a schedule for those pickups, just as there's a schedule. And in between Rupert and Knickerbocker, there is about a 3 car space because they have to take out the refuse. You know, we only have compact garbage. We don't have regular garbage. And so that there's another 3 spots that are taken out for that. But this is on Mrs. Brown's side of the street. It is only just a short step east of that. But I think DOT should take a look at it. I mean, we're all talking as if this was a regular street. It's not a regular street. It has a lot of cuts. Exists. Let's take it. Let's do it. Let's make it useful. It's empty. You can't, there's no parking. There's no parking at this 3 car length. Right at the curb.
Colleen, do you know what that is? I know that DOT supposedly looked at this street, or maybe didn't look at it. Said it was a quality of life thing and referred it to us, but maybe they did look at it a little. Do you know?
You know what, Chuck? I'm not familiar with the location and what's currently out there. I'm more than happy to come out there with Will. We can have a site visit and see what we can do to help Mrs. Brown. I think it's worth, investigating.
Okay.
I'll schedule something with Will.
Billy, next, can we unmute Billy? Go ahead, Billy.
Yep. So, I said this at the last full board meeting. I think we are capable as a committee of taking, on these, approvals, and particularly in a case like this where you had a majority of the building's tenants submit signatures to the board office. I found that to be a very significant fact. So on this specific case, I would support a resolution approving the change, the no parking sign rather. And, it's getting late, so I think I'm just going to leave it there. But if there's enough interest here, I'm comfortable with us doing that, given that we are in the process of putting in a plan to deal with these types of requests going forward.
Thank you, Billy. Michelle Birnbaum, can we unmute Michelle?
Yeah, I think the situation sounds dire enough where I'm fully in support of this solution. If the solution is 1 or 2 parking spots in front of the building, that's great. If the solution is what Rita is suggesting, that's great too, as long as there's a solution. It's interesting to note that this street, which is the entry to the drive, which is a hilly street, that there was no problem with putting a bike lane there. That one of the problems with bicycles is that they pick up speed and they go fast, and they're a danger. So I'm sorry that that's there. To me, that's an additional factor.
This isn't a bike lane street.
92nd Street?
No, 91st and is.
90 is the bike lane street, not 92nd.
Isn't it 91st and 92 the incline street? No. Okay, well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, I was picturing the incline. In terms of going forward, we may not want to have a precedent anymore that we always turn these down, but we also don't have to have a precedent where there's a rigid group of questions to ask. For example, and the Street Fairs Committee. When a fair comes to us, we have certain guidelines about food and safety and all that, much as you were suggesting, that there be some questions to ask. How big is the building? How this, how that, what Craig was suggesting. I think that's a good idea. I don't think it has to be rigid. I just think that as a board, when someone comes to us with this suggestion, that we do ask those questions and we make a decision based on that. We don't need to have a precedent, but the other side of that is we don't need to have a rigid, set of questions and rules and regulations. Very often that kind of thing causes more problems than it helps. There is some logic attached to this. The precedent against them did not serve us poorly, but now that something came along that might be an exception, I think we're attempting to solve it. But going forward, we don't need to be rigid. We can continue the same kind of dialogue as each applicant comes forward. That would be my suggestion, because inherently, if you come up with a rigid set of questions, you're inevitably going to leave something out. It's going to exclude another situation where there might be extenuating circumstances that you didn't think of, and then you still have to exercise some logic and consideration on a per basis in a per basis situation. So I think that's logical. We just leave it like that. This one, I think the case has been made that it's a problem, and I'd like to see it solved for Mrs. Brown and for others. And whether the solution is granting the spot, whether it's making it a neighborhood loading zone, whether it's investigating the curb cuts or the situation that already exists, as Colleen has volunteered to do with Will. Any one of those situations, as long as they improve what's there now, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Barbara Rudder. Can you unmute Barbara?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah, I am. Isn't there a resolution on the floor? I'd like to call the question. If not, I'll propose a resolution that we accept the suggestion that we have 2 spots allocated as no parking.
Okay. Is there a second? I see a few hands raised. So, okay. It's seconded now. I guess the question is, Barbara, when we say 2 spots, and the question, let me ask Colleen on this too. We could make this a no standing, couldn't we?
Or something else.
No parking. And that would still allow people to be dropped off and picked up, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever designation is the best designation.
That's probably the best designation.
Right.
Goes because other people can park in a no parking zone. I don't think that.
Right.
Do we want to have the flexibility to look at it either in front of the building or at another close proximity, just to take a look at that and see whether or not Rita's suggestion might work?
I would like to pass this, quite truthfully. If my memory is correct, and I know that street, but doesn't mean that I can do it now. It's still far enough away that it's not just older people, it's people with baby carriages, people holding little children, that it's still far enough away that it can still cause a problem in that specific street. It doesn't mean every street, but in that specific street, I feel strongly about it.
Okay. I mean, it's your resolution.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's talk. Mrs. Brown is next. Let's talk about the resolution then. So to approve 2 spaces.
I second Barbara's resolution.
Yeah, no, it's been seconded, Mrs. Brown.
Yes, and I also want to mention to Michelle, it is an incline on 92nd Street. So it's a problem. And as Rita suggested, down the street, I don't think that would work. I would like to see it in front of the building, and perhaps you can come back in 6 months and revisit it and see how it's working. But I think the solution is to have the 2 parking spaces in front of the building. It can be a no standing zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Dangor. Rebecca, can we, right, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be in front of the building. And I have a friendly amendment if Barbara and the board thinks this would be helpful. I think we should also seriously consider adding the speed bump. I think that also makes it clear that this is a unique situation in terms of other requests. And I think it's clearly a safety issue, and we should not, we should take every opportunity we have to make it a safer street.
Have them look at adding a speed bump there. Is that what you're saying, Barbara? I don't know. Is that okay with you? Can we unmute Barbara for a minute? Go ahead, Barbara. You're
Not
okay.
sure. I wanted to pass, and I'm not sure if that would make it not pass.
It's Colleen, I think Colleen, I think it's an excellent idea to include the request for a speed hump feasibility study. We'll be more than happy to see if the street qualifies for it.
In other words,
I'm
don't make it part of the resolution.
Yeah, and make it.
You can add it in the resolution as well. I mean, it's
Maybe whereas we will study whether, how about that, Rebecca? You know, a study to show whether that would add to it.
As long as I think it should be, even if it's just a study, be part of this specific resolution.
I just wanted to pass, and I'm not sure if that would make it not pass. So,
I don't think that's an issue, but that's your resolution.
okay, I defer to you, with that.
Okay. Okay. So Paul Crickler, you want to comment or say anything?
Yes, very quickly, just to support what Rebecca's saying, to give those people who don't know it a clear idea, the next street, how steep it is. The next street along is 91st Street, the one between Yorkville and Rupert, and it's a closed road. There's no traffic there at all. There are big gates. It's a crazy kind of brick surface. It's so steep. We used to take our kids there to go sledding at winter. That's where the neighborhood people take their kids to go sledding. Personal trainers take their clients there to run up the hill because it's really hard. I tried it a few times. It's really hard. It's really, really steep. So I'd love the idea of a speed bump there as well. They're studying for it.
Okay. So are we ready to vote? Rit wanted to say something, or you want to call a question maybe?
I was going to call the question, Chuck. Thanks.
Okay. There's a second. I see. Okay. And let's call the question. You have everybody still here? You have the.
I think so. I'll just say the list again. Myself, Chuck, Lori, Michelle, Mrs. Brown, Paul, Rebecca Dangor, Rit, Billy, Alita, Barbara, Rita, Peter.
Okay. And anyone who wants to vote no, abstention, or not voting for cause should raise their hand. Otherwise, you'll be presumed to vote aye. Okay. Going once, going twice. I think it's unanimous. Okay. And next month, we'll try to take up some ways to look at a policy and how we want to do it. We can continue this discussion, but good discussion for everybody. Okay. Next, we have a public hearing on a revocable consent to construct, maintain, and use a fenced-in area in front of 160 East 70th Street. Is there anyone here for the applicant? Do we have anyone here? Will, do we have anybody?
We have Alan. And if you are representing this, you will need to unmute yourself, but you also, it would help us if you raise your virtual hand using the reactions icon and find the raise hand button instead of just waving.
I'm waving. I'm sorry. I'm not good at this virtual
It's okay.
stuff. Eve Claros, who is my project director, is next to me on the screen.
Hello.
And she will be making the presentation and sharing her screen with everyone.
I will share my screen.
Shall we begin, or does anybody have any questions before we start?
No, go ahead. Go make your presentation, then we'll get the questions.
Thanks, Chuck. Okay, Eve, do you want to begin?
Sure. Can everyone see my screen?
I could a minute ago, and then it just seemed to have disappeared.
You're still sharing your screen, but it's just a desktop background.
Yeah.
So maybe it's open on a different monitor.
There we go.
There you go. Okay. First, I would like to locate the property for you. The property stands on the south side of East 70th. It's approximately 140 from Lexington, 140 feet from Lexington Avenue. It's between Lexington and Third, and it has a width of 19 foot 9. And the next screen that I'm going to show you are the existing conditions. So this is the south view of the block. This is our property. And then the north view is this. These are the existing conditions. This is our property, and the existing entryway, which is the same level as the sidewalk. The sidewalk is bluestone pavers, as you can see. And there's also a front areaway that is sunken to access the what used to be a rental unit. Was it used to be rented by an medical office. The neighbor on the east is 162, and these are the photos. They have the balustrades, wrought iron fence, and they also have a sunken front yard or areaway. This is the neighbor on the east, which is 158. They have a taller wrought iron fence on curb. It looks like a bluestone curb cap, and also a sunken areaway for their main entry. I'm gonna show another. Sorry.
Yeah, we lost your screen share.
Yeah, I need to can you see my screen?
No.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, this is a drawing that we submitted to DOT. I showed you these pictures earlier on the previous screens. So this is the proposed, but I'll be showing you the existing on the second page. So we've seen this existing conditions earlier, and this is a view from the west side. This is our property, which is already, when we started construction, it already had the temporary fence. So this is the existing plan. We have a tree pit in front of us, in front of the property. There's the sunken front yard to the basement rental office, and this is the main entryway, which is, like I said earlier, it's the same level as the sidewalk. And what we're proposing is we wanted to expand our the front side by 2 feet. Originally, when we submitted this to DOT, we actually wanted to have a bigger, like a larger expansion, but
we wanted to match the balustrade to the east.
yeah, it was up to here.
It suggested that we compromise backwards. So
Yeah.
instead of coming out the full 4 feet, we're asking to come out 2 feet. We have stepped the main floor, the ground floor entry, which now is all in the depressed areaway. And we had stepped the ground floor down about a foot. So we needed to place another stair in order to have the proper clearance at the bottom of the stairs. Do you want to show the proposed?
Sure.
So in order to keep the same clearance, which is about 5 foot 2 inches to the front door, we moved the front door from the east to the center of the building. And so as not to impede on the depressed areaway, we asked to come out another 2 feet. That's to add an additional step. That's also actually, well, the step really makes 2 steps. And for an area under planters where we would hide the garbage. And that you see in red, the extended area.
That's the 2 feet.
And we're still set back 2.5 to 3 feet from the balustrade to the east of us, but we're out 2 feet from the property to the west of us.
And we still have a 7'8" clear path from the edge of the tree pit to the front of our curb.
Whereas our neighbor has about
I believe this is 3'5" from here to here.
3'5", and we're proposing a 7'8".
Correct. I have 2 sections that we prepared. One is cutting through the steps and one is cutting through the trash enclosure, which is going to be on my next page. So
that's existing.
That's the existing on the top, and this is the proposed viewed from the sidewalk. So this is the section cutting through the trash area with a planter on the top.
Right.
So we went back and forth with DOT with this, and they're fine with this detail that we submitted to them with the trash enclosure, which is movable and removable. It's not permanent. And this is the section cutting through the steps. We're gonna have like a stucco finish on the inside of the retaining wall. This is the retaining wall that we are proposing, with a concrete base and stucco finish on both sides, and a granite cap with a painted wrought iron fence. And this just shows the existing condition. The area in red.
The balustrade to the left, which is coming out a lot further on the property. And how we're still set back.
We can't hear you. Can you speak up? We can't hear you.
Showing the balustrade to the east of us, which leaves a 3'7" clearance to the tree guard. And we're proposing a 7'8" clearance to the little tree fence. And again, we're doing it so since we lowered the ground floor, that we can add the extra steps to have the proper clearance at the depressed areaway.
And this is just like a detail of that curb on the fence.
And that's basically it.
Is that it?
I took some pictures of the the existing conditions in the neighborhood, in the block itself, and I would like to share that. So this is where we stopped earlier. And these are just the images and that we presented to Landmarks when we did a public hearing. So this is what you'll see in the sunken front area way. We'll have the planter in front, and this is the section, and this is the image that we submitted, that we presented to a public hearing. So this is how these are the precedents. We relocated the main entrance in the center just to be in compliance with the Beaux-Arts design. that you see from in the Upper East Side for East 73rd, 127 East 71st, and 11 East 69th. And the next image are, like these are the front area way in the block, how they are, how they have it. Wrought iron grill with fencing and gates are typical with concrete curbs.
So you've been approved by landmarks?
In a public hearing, yes. We still haven't gotten our certificate of appropriateness, and we're working with them on that, but we were approved.
We were approved as far as design and detailing and proportion. They're waiting for some structural details on how we're supporting our parapet up at the roof, but that's all they're waiting for at this point to release the letter.
Okay.
So that's pretty much it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public that want to say anything about this at this point? Okay. I see none. Do you see anything?
No, but I'll remind everybody, if you'd like to participate, go to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen where you'll find the raise hand button there.
Okay, so
if raised hand
members yet of the public, so why don't we go to Michelle Birnbaum, and we unmute Michelle.
Thank you. Do you have a picture of the existing condition and your proposed rendering side by side?
In plan.
You don't have a rendering? You do have a rendering, but you don't have it side by side with the existing?
I'm sorry, I don't have a side by side.
Okay, can you just put the rendering up?
Sure.
Yeah, those things showed what it looked like.
This is the rendering, and the front, it's
Yeah,
this
that one.
Sure.
Yeah, this one. Okay. First of all, when you say you had a public hearing, do you mean you were with staff? You don't mean in front of the commission?
No, in front of the commission.
Yes.
You were in front of the commission and you didn't come to the landmarks committee of this board?
We did come to the landmarks committee. We were disapproved by the landmarks committee. And then we had a public hearing with the landmarks commission and they approved us.
Okay, so you were disapproved by our committee. Can you tell us why?
It wasn't the areaway so much. It was the design, which was more of a neoclassical, and we reapportioned it to be more of a Beaux-Arts. Your objections were as to the design of the neoclassical, which the landmarks asked us to go back to them with a Beaux-Arts design, which we modified, and then they approved it.
Okay, so that was mainly of the entryway.
The doorway. The facade.
The entire
facade. The facade. Oh, the entire facade. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that was why we didn't think it was appropriate, but you made changes for the commission.
Correct.
My understanding. Okay. Now, you are coming into the street 2 feet from the property line, correct?
Correct.
All right. In general, I understand why you would like this. I understand why why the owners want a fence in front of it for security, for privacy, etc. But as a general thought, coming into the public way on property that doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the city, you're just extending your property line. I am not comfortable with that. And if you can hold it on that picture for a minute.
Sure.
Right. So when this
No,
house,
the earlier picture now.
When this house was built, Michelle, we extended way past the property line to the same extent that the balustrade and stairs to the east of us. Originally, this house extended, as did the house to the east of us, out 7 feet. And over the years, it was modified to less. And we're coming somewhere back to the middle, but in the original condition of this house, we came the whatchamacallit, the stairs, the stoop came out 7 feet.
You're fading out. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but your sound is fading out. Are you saying this house once had a stoop?
Yes.
Okay, that's pretty not uncommon. Let me say that. But can you go to, this is a drawing. Can you go to the picture? You have a photograph, not that one, but the one. All right, hold it here. If you wouldn't mind, hold it here. Now, I understand that you're on the south side of the street, that going both east and west, the adjoining fences are extending further out than you are now, and that you plan to be. However, that does not necessarily make it a correct decision. So, I mean, to my mind, looking at the house to the east of you now, that balustrade is way too heavy for the architecture and not something that I would approve at this moment. So just because it was or could be, or, you know, doesn't mean that it's appropriate now. You're looking, how high is the fence that you're proposing?
Is 36.
36, the
36.
same height.
The same one as you have now. That's 36 inches on the base. Does that include the base?
Yes.
So it's 36 inches total to the bluestone.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I understand what you're trying to accomplish, but I'm not in support of coming 2 feet into the public arena to take sidewalk space. Notwithstanding that your neighbors have done it, I don't think that they should have done it. I don't know when that happened in their history. I don't know that it didn't come before me. I'm on the landmarks committee of this board, and that's not something I would have approved. So for that reason, I'm sorry that I can't support this.
Understood.
Okay. Alita Camp is next. Alita, can we unmute Alita?
Thanks, Chuck. And I apologize for not having the camera on. I've been with a stomach ache. Anyway, I agree with Michelle. All evening long, we've heard about competing interests of the sidewalk and the streets, how many different interests there are, and to take up public way for private use is wrong. There are far more people that live in Manhattan now than there were at the last census. We don't know when the other fences were built. Tree pits, dogs stop at tree pits all the time. Children stop at tree pits. There means that there would be even less room for pedestrians. And I can support using public space for private interests, given how many competing interests there are. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I'm not expressing a view on this with this question, but I think isn't it really the only reason that they require a revocable consent is that they are taking up some in the public way, and that's why they're doing it. But
right, and that's why in general,
right.
I can't support using public space for private concerns.
Sure, that's okay. That's certainly
point.
A view, your view. That's fine.
Rit, thank you.
Rit is next. Can we unmute Rit?
Thanks, Chuck. I'm inclined very much along the same lines as Lita and Michelle, and I guess my question to the presenters is, what is the public purpose? What case would you make that says that it's in the public's interest for this board to approve this use?
Well, it's impeding less than it did when the house was built, even though I know Michelle doesn't think that's an issue. It is creating a situation to conceal trash and deal with rodents. And because of the DOB approval, we've already lowered the ground floor a foot. And if we don't add another stair out, we have to add another stair in. And we'd have less than an ADA compliant
clear path
into the front of the house, which has already been lowered.
Yeah, but I have to confess, looking at this plan view, you have other places you could conceal the trash. Like if you just pivoted it 90 degrees and had it on the sides. That would be that, because I agree, concealing trash could be a public interest.
Right.
But neither of your other two arguments are actually about the public's benefit. One is saying, well, you know, back in the old days, we used it this way, and now we want to reclaim some privilege. I agree with the previous speakers that what's to the left and to the right, neither one of those strikes me as acceptable. I would never support those. And you know, the fact that you went ahead and changed the ground floor, I just don't get it. You know, if you created a hazardous condition by changing the circumstance, and now you're saying, oh, as a result, we need to take sidewalk away from the citizens of New York. Like, I'm not sure that's the public's problem to fix. So how can I ask, like, what's the future intended use of this building?
Single family house.
It's a what? Sorry?
It's a one family.
Single one family house.
So we're going to take the sidewalk to serve the interests of a handful of people. I certainly cannot support this. This doesn't make any sense. I think you should redesign it in a way that stays within the property line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Billy Freeland.
I'm not sure I fully followed what happened with the Landmarks Commission, but am I correct that you do not need to or do not plan to go back to our Landmarks Committee?
No, because the final approval was made by the commission at a public hearing. So as far as I understand, we don't need to come back to you folks.
Okay, is that typical that you wouldn't come back to our committee following a disapproval to then get a subsequent approval? Maybe this isn't a question for you, Alan, but is that your typical practice?
That's been my experience in doing this for the last 20 some years. That oftentimes community boards approve or disapprove. The Landmarks Commission takes your recommendations into full consideration, and then they make their own final determination. I've never had to, in my practice at least, Charles, maybe you've had different experience, had to go back to get it reapproved by the community board once the Landmarks Commission did give their final approval.
Yeah, I wouldn't think you'd need to once Landmarks gives the final approval. I guess my question is more if you came to us in 2019, revised the proposal, why you wouldn't have come back to us again. But you know, look, I'm sympathetic to the comments Rit and Alita made, and I guess I just want to sort of say I was a little bit troubled that our Landmarks Committee, as far as I know, hasn't taken a look at this new proposal. I would really value what they think about this. And so I'd have trouble voting for it. I know we're not the Landmarks Committee, but putting on my full board member hat, I'd really value what they think about this. And I don't know whether there's any way to get you before them, even if it's not technically required, and even if it's a little too late, given that Landmarks has already made an approval.
But
so that's more of a comment.
Landmarks really look at this. This is really a DOT situation here.
Right, but Chuck, just given that they had to go to Landmarks initially.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I'm just saying.
I know the issue before us is a little bit different, but I think that's something for us as an entire board to contemplate.
So in order to redesign the stairs within the parameters of the existing property line, the central door could not exist because we would need steps down, a landing, and then the steps turn. So we would have to redesign the house, the central entryway to the house, and all kinds of things in order to take, the suggestions that we're hearing tonight and put the stairs within the existing area way. We would have to redesign the house. So it's kind of difficult for an architect, you're meeting with all these different committees and boards and commissions with people's opinions, whether they're personal or in the good of the public. And, we're just trying to move a project forward. We go to everyone we're supposed to go to, and some approve and some disapprove. And whose final word is the word of God or the act of God? I don't know, but we're just taking the steps we're required to take to make everyone happy. And it seems that, in my practice, we have not often been able to make everybody happy. But in retrospect, after the DOB approval and in retrospect, after the landmarks approval, to do what you're saying now, to go back to the existing areaway would necessitate putting the stair on one of the sides and having it turn to the point where we could no longer have a central entryway. We would have to move the entryway off to one side or the other. So that creates a problem for the building that was approved 2 years ago. So I'm flummoxed as a professional, and no matter what I do, I get approvals from one person, disapprovals from another. I'm told to go ahead by one body, and then I have to go back to another body again, who has their own opinion of what's in the public's interest or the private interest, or what precedents took place or didn't take place, or what neighboring properties extend out further. If I had asked to put a stoop back in here, Landmarks would have 100% approved the stoop and the areaway extension, just like they did next door. I am certain of that. In all the stoops, in all the 30 or 40 townhouses that I have done, whenever I propose to put a stoop back, we get unanimous approval from Landmarks to put back the stoop and the corresponding gate. And if I had gone in with that as my request in the beginning, we would have gotten the areaway nonetheless. What we're asking for is a lot less to accommodate a functional use of the areaway, so that we can keep the depressed central door that had been approved 2 years ago. And now, in retrospect, I'm going back 2 years later for you folks to tell us once again that you're not in love with the areaway coming out a little again. But if I had gone in with a whole stoop, we would have been approved for it. We would have built it. So I'm flummoxed, and I'm exasperated, and I'm confused, and I think the process is very imperfect. And that's not to say I don't understand your personal opinions to this, but it's a flaw in the way this whole approval process works, I feel and I believe.
Paul Crickler. Unmute Paul.
Thank you. Alan, I fully sympathize with how exasperated you must be, and I'm sure it's completely bewildering. If I was in your position, I would be going nuts right now. Having said that, I don't know how we got here, but taking public street space away is, I think, just the wrong thing to do. The streets we have, when you see idealized pictures of our sidewalks, there's always lots of space and occasional trees, but our street space is a disaster. New York City streets have scaffolding half the time. There's garbage piled up in bags. If I was mobility impaired, if I had to navigate these streets in a wheelchair or another kind of assisted device, it would be terrible. Pushing a stroller through some of these streets is terrible. So that gets to the general point about taking public street space away for private use. I think it's a bad idea, but I do sympathize with what you're going through. I wish there was a better way of doing this. That's my view.
Rita Popper. She hasn't spoken yet on this.
Let's take an up and down vote on this. I make a motion to approve the irrevocable consent.
Is there a second to that motion? Do we see a second there?
Can you get a thumbs up or something to show a second? Rita, I'm not seeing one.
Okay, then I make a motion to disapprove the irrevocable consent.
Okay.
I see a thumbs up from Rit.
Second there. Okay. Further discussion on this? There are some people, I guess, who still want to have their hands up. I know that Alita and Michelle still wanted to say something. Alita, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Chuck. I just want to say that I see that you're very frustrated to the architect, but the problem is that the building was designed a belief that you would be able to encroach upon the public way. And that was maybe the wrong approach. So we're not responsible for that. Rick put it better and more articulately than I could. It's that it's not the public's problem. Also, Landmarks approving the stoop, because I also sit along with Michelle on the Landmarks Committee, is that they like to see restorations back to the way the building was. And that has nothing to do with the use of the areaway by the public, which is the province of this committee. So as I vote on, I think, almost all of these kinds of situations, it's wrong for a private interest to want to use a public space. And so I'll end with that. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Alita. Michelle?
Yeah, I want to further affirm Alita's remarks and Ritz's remarks, but also make the statement that I think you have to bear some responsibility here for the architect, because you went ahead and you did construction prior to getting all your ducks in a row. You may have had Landmarks, you may have had the DOB, but you didn't have the approval of the irrevocable consent, and yet you went ahead and you did construction, and now you're sort of stuck with that. I sympathize. I think that's very. I'm sorry that happened, but it's not something that the committee can take under consideration. You should have had all your permits in a row and all your approvals before you started construction. So I won't support this.
Thank you, Michelle. Barbara Rudder?
Call the question. And this is negative against the project.
Okay. Is there a second on that? Yes, there is. Okay. So, Craig, you have everyone still here?
We still have everyone here. Myself, Chuck, Lori, Michelle, Mrs. Brown, Paul, Rebecca Dangor, Red, Billy, Alita, Barbara, Rita, Peter.
Okay, so people should raise their hand if they want to vote no, abstain, or not voting for cause. Does anyone besides me raise their hand? Okay, I'm voting no. Seeing nothing else, I guess we're done with this. The motion to disapprove has passed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wait, you have one more. Peter Borak, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to abstain on this one, actually.
Peter's abstaining. Okay, thanks. Okay. The next item, number 5, is a request for parking regulation change in front of 115 to 119 East 60th Street between Parker and Lexington Avenue from a no standing zone to commercial parking. Do we have someone here from the applicant? Will, anybody here? Oh, here. James Melios. Okay. Why don't you unmute James so we can tell us. He's ready. Okay. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. I know it's a long, or I don't know, I shouldn't say it long. I don't have a good frame of reference, but I know you've been spending quite a bit of your time here, so I appreciate you hearing me out later in the meeting. While I haven't been before the community board in probably 10 years, I'm not a stranger to our community. I'm a member of the East Midtown Partnership Board of Directors, the appointee to the NYC Hospitality Alliance, but I come to you today not as a resident of the area, but as a small business owner. So I'm the managing partner of Amali Restaurant, which is located on 115 East 60th Street. And for those of you who know us, or hopefully know us and like us, for those of you who don't, I think the parts that are germane for our consideration here is that we've been very involved in this community for 10 years. In 2016, we were fortunate to receive the Best for NYC Award, which included a rigorous B Corp certification process. And we've received accommodations from the mayor, President Obama, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, primarily for our work in creating a sustainable labor environment, which is very much in the news these days. And I'm very proud to say, March 2020, we have not laid off any of our colleagues. What we want to propose was a limited strip of parking between in front of 115, 117, and 119 from no standing until 7 p.m. And to revert back to what it was previously, I don't remember when, but my strong recollection is that it used to be a commercial parking zone as it was across on the south side of the street. I have maps ready to pull up if you need. Just one bit of history to explain the reasoning. In 2020, we applied and were accepted into the open restaurants program, but we did need to acquire, which we did from Commissioner Polly Trachtenberg, a variance for our outdoor dining because of the no standing 7 p.m. rule. We plan to apply when the DOT releases its new guidelines in 2023. But what I can say with surety is that a no stay until 7 p.m. Guideline would all but prevent us from applying to that program. When we applied for our participation in the open restaurant program in 2020, I spoke to our neighbors to the west of us, which is the Ascendant, which is a rehabilitation facility for those who face narcotic and alcohol problems, and the Children's All-Day School. And they need that no standing zone in front of them. So to facilitate ease of drop off in the morning, I mean, my kids go to school in the area. I understand that need. And for the rehabilitation facility, it's important to have no standing in front of them in the uncommon but occurrences where someone needs to be dropped off quickly for medical services. Fortunately, those two businesses, or I should say nonprofit and business, still have 100 feet of no standing regulation in themselves and the west side of the street. So by changing this small portion of the street to a commercial or reverting to commercial from no standing, it would be vital to the survival of our businesses to be able to apply to the 2023 DOT program. Now, the good news are, I think the comment someone said before about common sense is that were we not to be approved by the DOT, and that is a reality that we understand, right? There's no guarantees in this world, and whatever the DOT guidelines may be in 2023, we may not make it through. But we'd like the chance to apply. But the good news is, I think, but by changing even a limited strip of commercial back to commercial on 60th Street, this was said by everyone, by other people in many better ways before about the vital need in the mornings for commercial parking, especially on a street like East 60th Street between Park and Lexington. This goes to ourselves and other small businesses are having a very difficult time getting deliveries now in our neighborhood because people frankly don't want to deliver to us. And there's a bit of negotiating that has to go on to get reliable deliveries to our area. And the expansion, even however small, of commercial parking would greatly assist in that area. I want to say, by the way, thank you to the community board. It was very helpful in explaining our posting requirements, which I hope were successful, judging because I know I see two of our neighbors in the building in attendance. Look, I want to close by saying this. There's a tremendous sense of ennui or maybe tiredness of with people hearing about the issues facing small business restaurants, and I get it. Like, you hear about problems for a long time, and it gets very, you just kind of after a while move on. But for us, it is, and for my colleagues and my family, exceedingly real and exceedingly close to home. And by changing this regulation, you would, I think, do right by the residents and the business people in the district. And you would give us that chance to apply for that dining in 2023, which I would greatly appreciate. My colleagues would appreciate as well. So I thank you for your time. Sorry, I thank you for your time. I'm standing ready to answer any questions if I could be of help in this application.
Mr. Mealy, I just want to say that I think I can speak for the committee. We've always actually, we don't suffer from burnout or ennui when it comes to our businesses in the area, because we've always looked to try to help whenever we can. And I think we're going to continue to do that. Is Colleen still here? Do you know? I don't know if she is.
I don't see her.
I don't see her on the list here that I have in front of me, but maybe you don't see her either, Will?
No, I don't see her either.
Do you know why this area was no standing? Was it a continuation of the no standing zone that's in front of those other institutions?
Matt, do you happen to know? Matt from DOT Parking is still on.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, it looks like we lost Colleen. I believe that, I'm not familiar with this area, but I think that there's a few corridors that were intended to be no standing to facilitate bridge traffic across town. But I'm not sure about the history beyond that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks. Why don't we got a couple of members of the public that want to speak on this. Joe Sullivan, and can we unmute Joe?
I just wanted to speak to add my support on behalf of the applicant. I've known James for many years and have been a very happy customer of his. And I just wanted to share with the board that James is not only a very successful entrepreneur in his own an incredible job of make sure that the board was aware of the leader that for his group in the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Cynthia, we have another member of the public. Cynthia? Can we unmute Cynthia wherever you are?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Cynthia Brown. I live on the top floor at 115 East 60th Street, and congratulations, James. Running a restaurant in New York City is difficult, and the restaurant's been there for a while now. My question is this: there is now permanent outdoor seating in those spaces. There's outdoor dining, big structures built in the spaces that you are requesting to be turned into, I think, or I'm not understanding the petition correctly, but there's outside dining in those spaces that I think you are asking to be delivery spaces. Is there something I'm not understanding?
I think what he said, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, is that he had the things have extended out into those spaces, but he had to get a variance because of the no standing zone. And then in the permanent program, though, he'd like to have a permanent thing there, and he'd like not to have to go through the variance process if he meets all the other requirements. And that's what that would do if you made it a commercial zone. And if he could not get, and then if he somehow did not get the approval for that, at least you'd still have the commercial parking where there could help service the restaurant. So I think that's, I don't know, James, if I misstated, you can, or if I'm correct, he says, okay. So so that's what the situation of Cynthia is I think.
Okay, so initially you had to have you had to have a variance to build outdoor dining in a no standing zone. And now the request now is to have it commercial in case, understood. So in case there is the caveat that the 2023, the restaurant doesn't make it through, that at least there would be a commercial, a space for a commercial truck to park for deliveries.
Yeah, it's easier to apply, if it's a commercial zone. You don't have to get a variance, number one. But if you should not get approved, then the commercial zone will also help your restaurant.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, let's see if there's, I'm trying to see who's doing what here. Rebecca Dangour, I think, is next.
I move to approve this application.
Is there a second? Paul's seconding. Okay. Any further discussion on this? Paul, do you want to say? You seconded.
I completely support the idea of supporting James. I think people who run restaurants in New York City are heroes. It's such a hard business. And I just one question for you, James. Can I have the name of your restaurant again, please? I want to come visit when Omicron's gone away.
Sure. It's sorry, I didn't realize, Joe, I didn't realize that you were coming to this meeting. Amali, AMALI, on 60th Park in Lexington.
I wish you all the best.
Okay.
And sorry, I just wanted to make that motion to approve very quickly and very plainly, because I think you needed to hear how much support I'm sure you'll have from our committee.
Peter Borak wanted to say something. Peter?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to echo what Chuck said, which is we are not sick and tired of helping small business owners, especially restaurateurs, in the slightest. That's one of the things that we're here to do. So thanks for coming to us. And especially if you're a B Corp. Not many people know what B Corps are, but the fact that you're a restaurant and a B Corp is just phenomenal. And so anything that we or the other committees can do to help, please don't be shy.
Thank you.
Yes. Can I actually just say something before we take a vote on this? I would like, ideally, for there to be some sort of mechanism for DOT to be able to just perform an assessment. I would love to be able to see this work. I'm just looking at it from a traffic standpoint, and I'm concerned that given that having a parking lane there for even for commercial loading, with the no parking or no standing across the street, it would narrow it down to one lane. And as much as I would love to see fewer vehicles on the road and be able to prioritize restaurants, I do have concerns about congestion and air quality adverse impacts as a result of this, because unfortunately, this is a case where trying to help one location may have detrimental impacts down the line, and I wouldn't want to see that happen. So I want to try to find a way that we can balance that as well, to be able to find an approach that we could ideally assist with, help this restaurant and the small business owner who absolutely deserves to have an opportunity to have an open restaurant, but be able to balance that with the other potential elements that go into the broader equation here.
Okay, I assume that the fact that he got a variance was from DOT was probably that they thought it might work, but they can certainly take a look at it.
If it's helpful, if you look at the strip, I pulled up the map. We're talking about maybe like less than 12% of the street. Maybe it might be 9% of the street. So, I understand.
Right. I think it's a matter of, if you create a situation where you have essentially two lanes of traffic then becoming one as a result of it being no standing, because that's used for, whether it's used as a turning lane or whatever it may be, then my concern is by having a carve out situation that you're going to have downstream effects, and I just don't want to see that happen as a result of this. I'm going to support this because I support you, but I just want to put that out there. I just want to make sure that this works.
Understood.
I think Rita, did you want to say something? Rita Popper? Can we unmute Rita? Rita, unmute yourself.
Rita, go ahead.
There you go.
I'm going to get this mouse down to trained. Call the question.
Okay, is there a second to call a question?
Rebecca, is that what you're doing?
Yes. Okay. So
Well, I just want to be clear after Craig's comments what the resolution would be.
yeah, I think it'd be to approve this, and just, but you know, and I think the DOT would make an assessment of it to make sure it works.
Yeah, as long as the language is still strongly in support, then I'm fine with that.
Sure. Okay. So
Yeah, I'll just read the names because I think someone may have dropped off and I haven't figured out who that is yet. So I see myself, Chuck, Alita, Barbara, Billy, Lori, Michelle, Mrs. Brown, Paul, Peter, Rebecca, Rita.
Anybody else here? No, that's everybody. So maybe, is that everybody? Did you say Rit?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right, so anyone who wants to vote no, abstain, or not voting for cause should raise their hand. Going once, going twice, okay. So it's unanimous. Okay, well, this will be taken up at the full board, Mr. Melios, which is on the 12th, it's a week from today, I believe, right? Is that right, Will?
That's correct. And if you'll give me one moment, I want to say that James, your restaurant is great. It's around the corner from our office. And Rob Burns, who you probably know pretty well, and I go there from time to time. And I also want to say hi to Cynthia, who was my first constituent case when I worked at Dame Gradnick's office way back in 20 numbers. So. Okay, good. All right, so the next item was DOT updates, but I think since Colleen is here, we won't have that. I don't know if there are any. Now, do we have any old business or any new business? Barbara Rudder. Go ahead, Barbara. Unmute. Go ahead and mute, Barbara.
Okay.
You're okay.
I have two new businesses. One I'll do very quickly. On the corner of 2nd Avenue and 86th Street, on the northwest corner, is where the 2nd Avenue subway mechanicals, I guess that huge metal building is. On the 2nd Avenue side, it is very, very dark. On the 86th Street, they do have lights within there. And my neighbors are all talking about it. I don't know if it's darker than it was last year. You know, we noticed it more because of the light change, but it really is dangerous. Now, there is a bus stop that has some light, but it doesn't radiate along. And I'm just wondering if there's some way that light can come there to light the sidewalk. Before the 2nd Avenue subway, we used to have Chase Bank, and it was Wade Reed. And of course, it was very bright because of it. So that's one thing that I'd like to bring up, if that's okay.
Yeah, we can check into that.
Okay, the second one, I'm going to ask Will if you would share the screen. This is something I thought about and never, I would complain about it to myself and never go further. And then the landlord of the building came to me and talked about it. This is on 87th Street going south to halfway to 86th Street, to where Dwayne Reed is. There used to be the East End bar over there. And I assume for beauty reasons, this center thing was built that is very large. It goes like halfway between 87th down to halfway to 86th Street. The bus, I have gotten caught getting off the bus. The SBS stops on that corner. And if you get off, you could get caught. If you can see, there's very little room between getting off one of the doors and actually having to walk all the way around. It was once icy and it was very dangerous. During COVID, East End Bar had an outdoor seating that was terrible because there wasn't enough room. This structure that I guess was supposed to be for beauty is so disgusting. Everything died in there. It is a garbage pit. It's a place for dogs to go and filled with rats. I suggested to the landlord that he's responsible for cleaning it. And he rightfully said it's very difficult to clean it because these bars around it are so high that I don't know how you get in there and really clean what's going on. my suggestion, after looking at it quite a bit, is to get rid of it and pave it over. And there seems to be one tree that is so pitiful looking. I think it must have been something that just came up rather than something that was, really planted there. We certainly can have a tree pit someplace if we want beauty, but this is far from adding beauty. The landlord complained because he can't rent East End because, first of all, the rats come out to join everybody when they come to look at it, and they can't have any outdoor seating because there's just not enough room. And of course, they can't have it on the street because there's the bus stop. So I would like to ask and I've talked to all my neighbors about this also. We all said, just get rid of it. It's horrible. And people generally agree that it's a difficult place because of the bus also getting around.
Yeah. Barbara, after you and I had spoken about it, I actually was passing by it and noticed that there was a sign there, and I forget what the term was, whether it was rain garden or something of that nature, but it is there with the intent of being used for water collection. It's not a cosmetic garden as a planter would be, but it seems to be serving a purpose, and it's part of a DOT program that I'm blanking on what it is right now. There it is, rain garden.
It does say rain garden.
I didn't even get to see. Is there anything we could do to make it look better, to keep it cleaner, to keep the rats out, and also to make it safer for the buses? It's very hard if you get off the bus, and depending upon its SBS, you can get off, all of the 3 doors and get on it. There's very little space. I don't know if you can tell, but it's very narrow. And I once got off when it was slippery and all. It was really difficult.
Well, maybe we should talk to, this is a DOT thing that they put in there then?
My memory is it went in when it was the SBS, but maybe my memory is wrong.
It's part of the New York City Green Infrastructure Program.
Oh, I'm for that.
And it says here, I was just looking it up, the program, rain gardens. I'm trying to see. Is installing signs mounted to the rain garden tree guards. The signs that you saw are intended to raise awareness of rain gardens, differentiating them from standard tree pits and commuting their function and importance to people walking by. I'm still looking for what it actually does. The standard rain.
Where is this 87th and between?
It's really on the corner of 87th, going halfway towards 86, before Duane Reade. You know where Duane Reade is, corner of 86.
Yeah.
This ends before Duane Reade, so it's quite large. It's really a very large structure. Takes up a lot of the stores.
According to this document, rain gardens utilize a catch basin grate in the roadway instead of a curb cut inlet to redirect stormwater runoff into the practice. This reduces debris that flows onto the soil bed and also minimizes soil erosion from high intensity storms.
Hey, Craig, you have Matt from DOT who would like to chime in on some of the specifics of this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is a DEP project, so Department of Environmental Protection, that they do in association with DOT. So just so you know,
that's the Environment Committee, which is my committee. Okay.
So physician, heal thyself. You should, maybe this is something we can take up as a joint issue, Barbara.
I would love it, because we have other things we want to talk about in terms of the environment also.
Okay, so why don't we look to do that?
Great. I'd look forward to looking for you. Meanwhile, I guess it is the landlord's job to clean it. Whose job is it to clean it up? It is it's really a health. I mean, the rats are big and plentiful.
I don't know. If it's is it a DEP, Matt? Do you know, is it DEP that's has responsibility for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the specifics about maintenance. Sometimes these projects have maintenance partners, like local businesses or communities that may have requested and then agree to some type of maintenance, but I'm not sure about rain gardens. I'm very unfamiliar.
Right. Maybe we can find out something.
Okay. And at this point, the stores themselves, there's so many empties. It was that ice cream store that I think, sold something besides ice cream that's no longer there. East End is gone. There was something that was for an apartment building that's gone. So
Is
there's, you don't
there a
get,
bid here? A business
what?
improvement district?
I didn't hear you.
There's a merchants association, but not
Oh,
a bid.
okay. Because they might be involved, but yeah, I'm not sure.
All right.
There is.
If we can find something about this, and Barbara, we'll try to
Thank
see
you.
what we can
Thank you very
do,
much.
if anything, about it. Okay. Sure. Rita Popper, I think, is next. Can we unmute Rita? Or?
I just have a question. Craig did an incredible job with plotting the amount of bicycle accidents at which time of day by month. And there were a lot of things that we could have looked at as a result of it, of whether the months with shorter daylight, are there more accidents? Are the streets light enough? Are the bicycles, there are many bicycles that do not have lights on them. Are we still pursuing this, or it's a dead issue?
Maybe Craig.
I don't think it's a dead issue. I think certainly it's along with all things dealing with bike, cyclist safety and pedestrian safety, that it's a priority for us, and we'll be coming back to this as different topics related to it come up, or even if we're, even as we may focus on it specifically. Just need to figure out how we're going to incorporate that going forward. But
can I send you questions just related to that which you presented?
Can you send us questions?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. Sure. Thank you. I'm done.
All righty, Lori Boris. Can we unmute Lori?
Hi, thank you for letting me speak about this. And thank you, Will, for providing the weekly updates that you do about, articles that we may have missed in the papers and online. And I took particular notice of the one about the MTA giving an unlimited, trying to encourage people to come back onto the subway by providing an unlimited amount, equal to like a $33 weekly Metro card. So, but only for the Omni people. And so that raises again the issue of why can't they make Omni available to senior citizens and the disabled? So can we get them to come back and at least explain to us why they're still delaying? I believe in the article it said that it would be available for seniors and for the disabled in like 2023, and I'm happy for that. But it's like, I just don't understand why, when they invent these programs, they don't think about the increasingly aging population and the disabled. So could we get them to come back and talk to us about the Omni program?
I think we could definitely invite them to do that. They may not have answers, because I think clearly from the way that the rollout has gone, it hasn't been as smooth as they have anticipated. And they're still adamant that they're going to essentially decommission MetroCard at the end of 2023, at which point all these policies will have to have been worked out. And this fare capping, as you are mentioning, is a pilot program. I think I read that as,
yeah, they said it was 3 months or something. Yeah,
right, 4 months in duration. I assume it's a precursor to what will become a permanent program as to how they replace weekly fares. And they're going to have to hold many public hearings, because essentially, if they're going to be introducing new policies and having new new fare structures, that's going to require a whole set of public hearings. So I think we should definitely invite them for an update on Omni. I think part of this is that because they haven't solved the broader issues of how they're going to handle fares for specific groups like persons with disabilities and seniors, that they weren't ready to pilot it for everyone in a MetroCard situation. And for MetroCard, I don't even know that they have the technologies in place for them to be able to do fare capping. So if they haven't introduced Omni for seniors and persons with disabilities, then that's the bigger issue, I think.
Yeah. One thing that confused me in the article is that they mentioned that you could buy an Omni card, which I had never heard before. And so the issue is, if you can buy an Omni card as opposed to a Metro card, why can't they make the Omni card the same way they do the Metro card in terms of the half price fare? Like, it seems to me that that would be a fairly easy thing to do. I didn't know that there was such a thing as buying an Omni card.
Yeah, that's only now being rolled out. That, I think, was what I was referring to as one of the elements of Omni that was delayed, that they would have a separate actual Omni card. So that's now, I think, starting to be introduced, and they may very well be doing that. And it should be relatively simple because it's really just programming it into.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I just, you know, I feel the need to raise the accessibility issue because it just seems to be forgotten, you know, at every turn. So that's my spiel.
Thank you. Alita, can we recognize Alita Kemp?
Thanks, Chuck. This is brief because it's not really new business. It's just a plea to the DOT to please consider all of the comments that were made by this committee about the irrevocable consent for sidewalk space, and consider the public interest. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of more, I think, Barbara Rudder.
Very quickly, a question. I don't think you can buy a Metro card that's a senior card. You have to apply for it. Am I right? Unless it's something I didn't know. So that's why maybe the Omni, you can't buy a senior Omni, and you know, maybe that's why the Omni is different. They certainly could do the same thing with Omni that they do with Metro, is have you apply, show your, you know, you prove your age and so on. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Rebecca Dangor. Can we unmute Rebecca?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second? To assume so. Yes, great. We moved and seconded. We are adjourned. I thank everyone, and we'll see you next week at the full board meeting.
Good night, everyone.
Happy New Year to everybody.